Chapter 1. The Silence Before. The coffee in Eris Thorne's mug rippled, but not from the earth. It was just the trembling of his own hand. He set the mug down on the cluttered desk of the University of Washington Seismology Lab, staring at the monitors that walled him in. It was 8:14 a.m. on a Tuesday. Outside, the Seattle gray was doing its usual routine, drizzling just enough to annoy, not enough to cleanse. "You're seeing ghosts again, Eris," his colleague, Ben, muttered, not looking up from his phone. "The sensor in Knee Bay is glitchy. It's been glitchy since the storm last week." "It's not a glitch," Eris said, his voice low. He tapped the screen. "Look at the compression waves. P waves usually travel faster, cleaner. These are dragging. Like the plate is catching on something deep." "It's the Juan de Fuca plate," Ben laughed, spinning in his chair. "It always catches. That's what it does. That's why we have jobs." Eris didn't laugh. He rubbed his temples. For 20 years, the Cascadia subduction zone had been the boogeyman of the Pacific Northwest. A 700-mile fault line running from Northern California to Vancouver Island. It had been quiet since 1700. Pressure had been building for over 3 centuries, roughly 40 millimeters a year. That was 12 meters of accumulated slip waiting to snap back like a rubber band. "I'm calling the USGS, Eris said, reaching for the landline. "Don't be that guy," Ben warned. "You cry wolf, and they cut our funding." Eris picked up the receiver. There was no dial tone. He frowned, tapping the hook switch. "Line's dead." Ben looked up, a frown finally creasing his forehead. "Power's on. Internet." Eris checked his computer. Server connection lost. A deep, resonant thrumming sound began to vibrate through the floor. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears, it was a sound you felt in your teeth. The coffee in the mug didn't just ripple this time, it jumped. 200 miles south, in Portland, Oregon, Sarah Jenkins tightened the tourniquet on the junkie's arm. "Come on, stay with me," she grunted, slapping the man's cheek lightly. The alleyway behind the Burnside Bridge smelled of urine and stale beer. The rain was picking up. "He's gone, Sarah," her partner, Mike, said, checking his watch. "Pupils are fixed." "I got a pulse." "Thready," she argued, pushing a dose of Narcan. "Come on, buddy." Breath. The man gasped, a violent, retching intake of air. Sarah sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead with a gloved hand. "Welcome back to the land of the living." Mike sighed, standing up to stretch. He looked up at the underbelly of the massive bridge above them. The morning commute was in full swing. The roar of tires on wet pavement was a constant drone. "I hate Tuesdays," Mike said. "Traffic is always." He stopped. The roar of the traffic had changed. It wasn't the smooth whoosh of tires anymore. It was a screeching, grinding metal-on-metal scream. Sarah looked up. The massive concrete pillars of the bridge were vibrating. Dust, decades of soot and grime, was puffing out of the joints in the concrete like smoke signals. "Mike." Sarah stood up slowly. The ground beneath them, the solid asphalt of the alley, rolled. It didn't shake, it rolled, like they were standing on a waterbed. Sarah was thrown against the brick wall of the adjacent building. "Earthquake!" Mike yelled, grabbing the frame of the ambulance. Off the coast of Newport, Oregon, the ocean was glass. Mac Mackenzie smoked his cigarette, leaning against the railing of the Lady Jane, his 40-foot trawler. They were 20 miles out, dragging nets for crab. "Depth sounder is acting weird, Skip," his deckhand, Ruiz, called out from the cabin. "Fish blocking it?" Mac asked, flicking the butt into the sea. "No. The bottom. The numbers are jumping. Like the floor is moving up and down." Mac walked into the cabin. He looked at the sonar. The depth reading flickered. 400 feet. 380 feet. 410 feet. "That's impossible," Mac muttered. Then, he saw it. On the horizon, looking back toward the land, the coastline looked wrong. It was usually a thin green strip against the gray sky. But now, the green strip was blurring. Dust clouds were rising from the cliffs, massive plumes of brown earth shooting into the sky. Even from 20 miles out, the sound reached them a few seconds later. A low, thunderous boom, like a jet breaking the sound barrier, but sustained. "Skip," Ruiz whispered, pointing at the water around the boat. The water was sizzling. Tiny bubbles were rising everywhere, turning the dark Pacific white. Methane release. The sea floor was tearing apart. "Cut the nets," Mac ordered, his voice icy calm. "What?" "Cut the damn nets, Ruiz. Now." Mac slammed the throttle forward, spinning the wheel to face the boat west, away from land, toward the open ocean. "Where are we going?" "Home is that way." Ruiz pointed to the dust clouds engulfing the coast. "There's no home anymore," Mac said, staring at the horizon where the ocean met the sky. "If that was a 9-pointer, the water is going to draw back. And then it's going to come back." Mac looked at the GPS. "We need depth. If we don't get over the shelf break before the wave builds, we're dead." As the Lady Jane roared toward the deep, the radio crackled to life. It wasn't a voice. It was just a scream, cutting through the static, before going abruptly silent. The Cascadia fracture had unzipped. The clock had started. Chapter 2. The Shaking. The world did not end with a bang. It ended with a roar that sounded like the earth was tearing its own throat out. Seattle, Washington. In the seismology lab, Eris Thorne was thrown to the linoleum before he could scream. The floor didn't just tilt, it heaved upward, a violent, piston-like motion that sent monitors, books, and coffee mugs airborne. "Under the desks," Eris bellowed, though he couldn't even hear his own voice over the grinding noise. It was a cacophony of structural failure, steel screeching, glass shattering, and the deep, bass-heavy groan of concrete under torsion. He scrambled on hands and knees, shards of glass slicing into his palms, and wedged himself under a heavy oak workstation. Ben was nowhere to be seen. The shaking changed. The initial sharp jolts, the P waves, gave way to the S waves, the rolling shear waves that turned solid ground into a liquid ocean. The building, a brutalist concrete structure from the 70s, began to sway. 1 minute. Most earthquakes Eris had studied lasted seconds. 20, maybe 30. This was different. This was the subduction zone unzipping from Northern California all the way to Canada. It was a zipper opening at 2 miles per second, and Seattle was right in the middle. The lights exploded overhead, plunging the room into grayscale daylight filtering through the dust. A massive filing cabinet toppled, crushing the chair Eris had been sitting in moments ago. 2 minutes. The shaking grew more violent. It wasn't just side to side anymore. It was multidirectional. Eris felt his stomach lurch into his throat as the floor dropped 3 feet, then slammed back up. The sensation was like being inside a washing machine tumbling down a mountainside. Through the shattered window, Eris caught a glimpse of the outside world. The brick facade of the chemistry building across the quad peeled away like dead skin, crashing down onto the students running below. The ground itself was bubbling, liquefaction. The manicured lawn of the campus split open, geysers of mud and gray sand shooting up as the water table was squeezed out of the earth like a sponge. 3 minutes. "Stop," Eris whispered, curling into a fetal ball, covering his head. "Please, just stop." But the earth didn't care. It shook until the structural integrity of the city failed. The sound of the Space Needle, miles away but visible from high points, was lost in the general din, but the sound of the I-5 express lanes collapsing was unmistakable, a series of thunderclaps that rattled Eris's teeth. 4 minutes. Silence didn't return. The violence just slowly dialed down from apocalyptic to catastrophic. As the primary shaking subsided to a terrifying vibration, the alarms began. Fire alarms, car alarms, and the screams. Eris crawled out from under the desk. The room was tilted at a 15-degree angle. The north wall was missing. He looked out over the city. Seattle was burning. Plumes of black smoke rose instantly from ruptured gas mains. The skyline was gap-toothed. But the most terrifying thing wasn't the fire. It was the silence of the sirens. There were no emergency sirens wailing in the distance. The emergency response infrastructure had been decapitated in 4 minutes. Portland, Oregon. Sarah Jenkins couldn't stand up. The alleyway behind the Burnside Bridge had turned into a death trap. When the S-waves hit, the unreinforced masonry buildings of Old Town Portland, brick structures built 100 years ago, disintegrated. Sarah and Mike had huddled against the ambulance, the only sturdy object in the alley. Bricks rained down like hail, denting the roof, shattering the windshield. A fire escape from the 3rd floor tore loose, screeching as it swung down and crashed into the dumpster a few feet from them. The bridge! Mike yelled, pointing upward. The Burnside Bridge, a massive steel and concrete artery connecting the city, was dancing. The lift span in the center slammed up and down, severed from its counterweights. With a sound that tore the air apart, the western approach ramp failed. Sarah watched in horror as a transit bus, trapped on the span, slid backward. The concrete beneath it crumbled, and the bus, along with 3 sedans, plummeted 60 feet onto the pavement below. The impact shook the ground harder than the quake itself. Dust, thick, choking, blinding dust, engulfed them. Sarah pulled her shirt over her nose, coughing, eyes streaming. The shaking was still happening, a nauseating rolling motion that made her seasick. "Mike!" she screamed. "I'm here." His voice was ragged. He was clutching the side mirror of the rig, his face white with mortar dust. They waited. For what felt like hours, the earth convulsed. When it finally slowed, the silence was heavy, broken only by the settling of debris and the hiss of a ruptured steam pipe nearby. Sarah stood up, her legs trembling uncontrollably. She looked toward the street. The street was gone. A sinkhole, easily 20 feet wide, had swallowed the intersection of 2nd and Burnside. A water main had burst, and millions of gallons of water were already flooding the crater, mixing with the gas from a broken line. "We need to move," Sarah said, her training kicking in through the shock. "The gas. If that ignites." "Where?" Mike asked, looking around wildly. "The roads are blocked. The bridge is down." "Higher ground," Sarah said, grabbing the trauma bag from the back of the crushed ambulance. "We go up. Away from the river." She didn't mention the other reason to get away from the river. Portland wasn't on the coast, but the Columbia and Willamette rivers were connected to the Pacific. If the surge was big enough, "Grab the radio," she ordered. Mike reached into the cab and pulled the mic. "Dispatch, this is Medic 41. We have a catastrophic structural failure at the Burnside Bridge. Multiple casualties. Requesting backup. Over. Static. Dispatch, do you copy?" "Static." "Mike," Sarah said gently, putting a hand on his shoulder. "Look at the cell tower." She pointed to the roof of the building across the river. The lattice tower was bent in half, dangling over the edge of the roof like a broken finger. "We're on our own. The Pacific Ocean." Mac Mackenzie felt the earthquake differently than those on land. On the open water, you don't feel the ground shake. You feel the water turn hard. The Lady Jane shuddered violently, as if a giant hand had reached up from the depths and grabbed the keel. The hull groaned, vibrating so hard that the compass on the dash cracked. "What is that?" Ruiz screamed, clinging to the doorway of the cabin. "Shock waves," Mac shouted over the engine's roar. "Sound traveling through the water." He kept the throttle pinned. The diesel engine screamed, pushing the heavy boat up the face of the swells. They needed depth. They needed to get past the continental shelf break, where the ocean floor dropped from a few hundred feet to thousands of feet. If they were in shallow water when the tsunami passed, the wave would jack up, turning into a wall of water that would crush them. If they were in deep water, the wave would pass under them, a massive, long swell, but survivable. Mac looked back at the coast. The dust cloud had expanded, swallowing the entire horizon. He couldn't see the lighthouse anymore. He couldn't see the cliffs. "Skip, look at the GPS." Ruiz pointed. Mac glanced down. The depth readings were fluctuating wildly. 200 feet. 600 feet. Error. The seafloor was collapsing. The landslides underwater were displacing cubic miles of water. Hold on, Mac yelled. The first surge hit them. It wasn't the tsunami yet, it was the chaotic water caused by the shaking itself. A confused, choppy mess of waves coming from all directions. The boat slammed down into a trough, burying the bow in green water. Mac fought the wheel, wrestling the rudder to keep them straight. If they broached, turned sideways, they would capsize. Come on, old girl, Mac growled, teeth grit. They crested the next wave. Ahead of them, the water looked different. A mile out, there was a strange line on the ocean surface. It wasn't a breaking wave. It looked like a step. The ocean level on the other side of the line was higher than where they were. It was the leading edge of the tsunami. Ruiz, get inside. Close the hatch, Mac ordered. We're gonna hit it. We have to climb it. Mac gunned the engine. The Lady Jane raced toward the wall of water. It wasn't a curled surfing wave, it was a sloped wall of energy, moving at 500 miles an hour. They hit the slope. The boat pitched up, steeper than it had ever gone before. Gravity fought the engine. Mac felt himself pressed back into the captain's chair. The sky disappeared, replaced by the dark blue wall of the swell. Up, up, up. For a terrifying second, the propeller cavitated, spinning in air as they crested the peak. Then, they slammed down the backside. Mac gasped for air. They were floating. The engine was still running. He looked back. The wave rolled on toward the coast, silent and unstoppable. It was invisible in the deep water, just a massive hump in the ocean. But in 20 minutes, when that energy hit the shallow water of the coast, God help them, Mac whispered. He looked at the instrument panel. The depth sounder read 2,000 feet. They were safe from the wave. But as Mac looked at the rising smoke covering the entire eastern horizon, he realized the terrifying truth. They were alive. But they were stranded at sea, and the world they knew was gone. Chapter 3. The Wave. The Pacific Ocean, 15 miles offshore. The ocean did not look like water anymore. It looked like a bruise. Mac Mackenzie gripped the wheel of the Lady Jane, his knuckles white. They were floating in the trough behind the first massive wave, a valley of water so deep the sky felt miles away. The silence of the open ocean had returned, but it was a lying silence. Ruiz, Mac said, his voice raspy. Get the binoculars. Ruiz crawled out of the cabin, his face a mask of terror. He fumbled for the heavy marine binoculars on the dash and raised them toward the east. I can't see the town, Ruiz whispered. The dust. No, Skip. I mean, I can't see the town. Mac took the glasses. He focused them on the coastline of Newport. The dust from the landslides had begun to settle, stripped away by the wind generated by the massive displacement of water. What he saw made his stomach turn to ice. The coastline had changed shape. The familiar landmarks, the Yaquina Bay Bridge, the hotels along the beachfront, the jetty, were simply erased. In their place was a churning, white wall of foam that was still pushing inland. It looked like a boiling milk pot spilling over a stove. The wave wasn't a surfer's curl. It was a flood. The ocean had simply decided to occupy the land. God, Mac breathed. Through the magnification, he saw things that his brain refused to process at first. A 3-story hotel was floating, intact, moving inland at 30 miles per hour. It collided with the hillside, exploding into splinters. The massive arched bridge that connected the highway? Gone. Just 2 concrete stumps sticking out of the swirling white water. My mom, Ruiz choked out, dropping to his knees. She's at the cannery. She's right on the water. Mac didn't answer. He couldn't. The cannery was gone. The ground it stood on was likely scoured down to the bedrock. Brace yourself, Mac yelled suddenly. The water around the Lady Jane began to change direction. The wave had hit the land, expended its energy, and now gravity was taking over. The water was rushing back out. This was the drawback. The most dangerous part for a boat near the coast. What is that? Ruiz pointed to the water rushing toward them from the land. It wasn't water. It was a slurry. A thick, brown soup of mud, pulverized houses, trees, cars, and bodies. It was civilization being vomited into the Pacific. Debris field. Mac slammed the throttle into reverse, trying to spin the boat. Grab the boat hooks. If the prop gets fouled, we're dead in the water. The debris hit them with a deafening clatter. A roof of a house slammed into the hull, scraping along the fiberglass. Push it off. Mac roared. Ruiz scrambled to the stern, jamming the aluminum pole against the shingles of the floating roof, straining to shove it away from the propeller. Mac fought the wheel. The ocean currents were chaotic. Whirlpools were forming where the retreating water met the incoming swells of the second wave. Skip. Look out. A massive spruce tree, roots and all, was tumbling through the water like a darkly turning cog, aiming straight for their bow. Mac gunned the engine forward, turning hard to starboard. The boat heeled over violently. The tree missed the hull by inches, its massive root ball creating a wake that splashed over the deck. They fought the debris for an hour. It was a slalom through the wreckage of their own town. A Toyota Camry bobbed past, trunk open. A chaotic tangle of fishing nets. A child's yellow slide. When the water finally calmed enough to idle, Mac killed the engine to save fuel. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the slapping of water against the hull. They were alive. But they were drifting in a sea of ghosts. We can't go back to Newport, Mac said, staring at the brown stain that now extended miles out to sea. The harbor is gone. The channel will be silted in or blocked by wreckage. So where do we go? Ruiz asked, sitting on the deck, hugging his knees. Portland. Portland's up the Columbia River. Mac shook his head. If the wave hit the coast this hard, it funneled up the river. Astoria, Longview, they're probably underwater. And the bar crossing will be suicide. Mac pulled out a paper chart, spreading it over the dashboard. The GPS was still patchy, likely due to satellite alignment or ground station failure. He had to navigate the old way. We have half a tank of diesel, Mac calculated. Maybe 200 miles if we go slow. He traced a finger down the coast. There, he pointed. Heceta Head. The lighthouse. It's on a high bluff, 200 feet up. The wave wouldn't have reached the keeper's house. And there's a cove on the south side, Devil's Elbow. It's deep water, protected by rock cliffs. If we can get in there, we can anchor. And then what? Ruiz looked at him, eyes red. Mac looked at the shoreline, where fires were starting to burn as gas lines ignited in the wreckage. Then we walk, Mac said. We find high ground. We find food. And we pray. Seattle, Washington. The water in Puget Sound didn't act like the ocean. It acted like a bathtub being kicked. While the coast was being decimated by the tsunami, Seattle faced a different water threat, the Seiche. The shaking had caused the water in the enclosed sound to slosh back and forth. Eris Thorne watched from the shattered window of the lab as the waterfront took the hit. The great wheel, the massive Ferris wheel on the pier, had collapsed into the bay during the quake. Now, the water was surging over the seawall. It wasn't a 100-foot wave. It was a 10-foot surge of dark, oily water that flooded Alaskan Way. It smashed into the storefronts, carrying ferry boats with it. He watched as a Washington State ferry, the Wenatchee, was lifted by the surge and slammed broadside into the ferry terminal, crushing the walkway like an aluminum can. But Eris had bigger problems than the water. Ben. Eris called out into the dusty gloom of the lab. Here, a weak voice replied. Eris scrambled over the piles of books and broken ceiling tiles. Ben was pinned. A heavy steel server rack had toppled over, trapping his legs. I can't feel my feet, Ben whispered. His face was gray, covered in a sheen of sweat. "I'm going to get you out," Eris lied. He pushed against the server rack. It didn't move. It weighed at least 500 pounds. "Don't." Ben winced. "Eris, the aftershocks." As if on cue, the building groaned. A magnitude 6.0 aftershock rippled through the city. Not as violent as the main event, but enough to shake more dust from the ceiling and make the floor tremble. "The building is compromised," Eris said, looking at the cracks running up the load-bearing wall. "We have to go." "You have to go," Ben corrected. "You can't lift this." "I'm not leaving you." "Eris." Ben grabbed his wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. "Listen to me." The USGS feed, before the line cut. "Did you see the epicenter?" Eris shook his head. "No. It wasn't just the subduction zone," Ben coughed, blood speckling his lips. "The readings, there was a secondary trigger. The Seattle fault. It ruptured too." Eris froze. The Seattle fault ran directly under the city, from the naval shipyard to the Cascades. If that had gone, that means the city is cut in half, Eris realized. The bridges. I-90, 520. They'll be gone. Your daughter, Ben wheezed. Maya. She's in Bellevue, right? Yes. You can't cross the lake, Eris. The bridges are down. You have to go south. Around the lake. It's the only way. Ben's eyes started to drift close. Go. Save your kid. Leave me. Eris looked at his friend. He looked at the server rack. He looked at the swaying walls. He stood up. He grabbed a metal pry bar from the geology toolkit on the wall. I said I'm not leaving you, Eris grunted, jamming the bar under the server rack. Now, on 3. Scream if you have to. Portland, Oregon. Sarah Jenkins stood on the roof of a parking garage on 3rd Avenue. The floodwaters from the burst mains and the river surge had turned the streets below into canals. She had her triage kit open. Around her were a dozen survivors, people who had been pulled from the rubble or had climbed up to escape the rising water. Hold this, she ordered a businessman in a torn suit, handing him a gauze pad. He pressed it against the head wound of a young woman lying on the concrete. Sarah looked out over the city. It was a ruin. The liquefaction had tilted buildings at crazy angles. Fires were burning unchecked in the Pearl District, the black smoke merging with the gray rain clouds. But it was the sound that haunted her. It wasn't the sirens. It was the lack of them. She walked to the edge of the roof and looked south. The OHSU hospital, the main trauma center, was up on the hill. It should be safe from the water. But the aerial tram that connected it to the waterfront had collapsed. The cable lay draped over the freeway like a dead snake. We can't stay here, Mike said, walking up to her. He had improvised a splint for his own wrist using a magazine and duct tape. The fires are spreading. And we're out of water. The hospital, Sarah said, pointing to the hill. Marquam Hill. It's a fortress. They have generators, supplies, helipads. That's 5 miles away, Mike argued. Through that. He gestured to the flooded, debris-choked streets. We don't have a choice, Sarah said. She turned to the group of survivors. Listen up. If you can walk, you're coming with us. We are moving to the hospital on the hill. It's going to be hard. But if we stay here, we burn or we starve. She shouldered her pack. She didn't know if the hospital was still standing. She didn't know if the roads were passable. She just knew that if she stopped moving, the reality of what had happened would catch up to her. And if that happened, she would break. Move out, she commanded. And so, the long walk began. Chapter 4. The City of Glass. University of Washington, Seattle. The steel pry bar bent. It was a subtle flex, a vibration in the metal that Eris felt through his gloves, but it was enough to terrify him. Push! Ben screamed, his voice cracking with pain. Eris planted his feet against the base of the overturned desk, wedging the bar under the server rack. He gritted his teeth, veins bulging in his neck. The building was still groaning, settling into its new, broken foundation. 1, 2, heave. Eris threw his entire body weight backward. The rack lifted, 1 inch, 2 inches. Go. Move your legs. Eris roared. Ben dragged himself backward on his elbows. His right leg trailed uselessly, the denim of his jeans soaked dark with blood. As soon as his boots cleared the shadow of the rack, Eris let go. The steel unit slammed back down with a thunderous crash that shook dust from the acoustic tiles overhead. Both men lay panting on the tilted floor. The air was thick with the smell of pulverized drywall and ozone from sparked wires. "We aren't out yet," Eris wheezed, crawling over to Ben. He looked at the leg. It was bad. Compound fracture. The tibia was tenting the skin. "I can't walk, Eris," Ben whispered, eyes squeezed shut. "I know." Eris grabbed Ben's arm and hauled him up. "Put your arm around my neck. We're going to the stairwell. The elevators are coffins." They moved like a three-legged crab, stumbling through the debris. The hallway, usually a bustling corridor of students and coffee carts, was a wind tunnel. The windows on the western face of the building had blown out. The wind, whipping off the sound, was driving rain into the hallway. But it wasn't just rain. "Watch your eyes," Eris yelled, ducking his head. Small, glittering shards were swirling in the wind. The skyscrapers of downtown Seattle, the glass facades of the modern campus buildings, they had shed their skins. The city was shedding millions of tons of tempered glass. It fell from the sky like diamond snow, tinkling as it hit the pavement, slicing through clothes and skin. They reached the stairwell. The emergency lights were flickering, casting strobing shadows. The concrete stairs were cracked, pulled away from the wall by 1 inch, but they held. 4 flights down. Every step was a torture session for Ben, a test of endurance for Eris. When they finally burst out of the emergency exit onto Red Square, Eris stopped. The University of Washington's Red Square was a massive open plaza paved with brick. Now, the bricks were heaved up in waves, like a frozen Red Sea. The Gothic spires of the library stood, but the modern glass buildings surrounding the square had been stripped naked. The ground glittered. A carpet of blue and green glass shards covered everything. "Over there," Eris pointed. Under the shelter of the concrete overhang of the Odeum, a group of students had gathered. They were huddled together, illuminated by the flashlights of cell phones. Eris dragged Ben across the wet, slick bricks. "Help!" Eris shouted. "I need a medic." A young woman in a purple hoodie ran out. She had a first aid kit, a small, plastic consumer box that looked woefully inadequate. "He's bleeding," Eris said, gently lowering Ben onto a dry patch of concrete. "His leg is broken." "I'm a nursing student," the girl said, her hands shaking as she ripped open a package of gauze. I can stabilize it." Eris stood up, wiping the rain and sweat from his face. He looked at Ben. "Ben," Eris said. Ben opened his eyes. They were hazy with shock. "Go," he whispered. "Go find Maya." "I'll come back," Eris promised, though he knew it was a lie. In a disaster like this, you never went back. You only went forward. Eris turned away. He stepped out from the overhang into the rain. He looked south, toward the city center. From this vantage point, he could usually see the skyline. Now, it was a silhouette of jagged teeth against a gray sky. Smoke obscured the base of the buildings, but the tops were visible. The Columbia Center, the tallest building, was dark. The Space Needle was still standing, miraculously, but the area around it was engulfed in black smoke. Eris checked his watch. 10 a.m. He had to get to Bellevue. The floating bridges across Lake Washington were almost certainly gone, snapped by the Seiche waves or the fault rupture. That meant he had to go the long way, south around the lake, through Renton. A 30-mile trek. On foot. Through a city that had just been murdered. Eris tightened the straps of his backpack, pulled his hood up against the glass rain, and started walking. Portland, Oregon. The long walk was living up to its name. Sarah Jenkins led her ragtag group of 12 survivors down First Avenue. They couldn't use the sidewalks. The unreinforced masonry buildings had collapsed outward, burying the sidewalks in piles of red brick and timber. That left the street. But the street was no longer asphalt. It was soup. The liquefaction had turned the soil beneath Portland into a quicksand-like sludge. In places, it was knee-deep. It sucked at their boots, threatening to pull them down. "Keep moving," Sarah shouted from the front. She was using a piece of rebar she'd found as a walking stick, probing the muck ahead of her for open manholes or sinkholes. "Don't stop. If you stop, you sink." "I can't," an elderly woman whimpered. She was clinging to the arm of the businessman in the torn suit. "My shoes." "Forget the shoes," Sarah said, wading back. She grabbed the woman's other arm. "We have to get to higher ground. The water is rising behind us." It was true. The Willamette River, swollen by the tsunami surge pushing up from the coast, was backing up into the storm drains. The soup was getting deeper. They reached the intersection of Market Street. Sarah stopped dead. Ahead of them, a tram car lay on its side, derailed. But that wasn't what stopped her. It was the dogs. A pack of 3 stray dogs, or maybe house pets that had panicked, were tearing at something in the rubble of a collapsed bodega. They looked up as Sarah approached, teeth bared, hackles raised. Civilization had been gone for less than 2 hours, and the primal order was already returning. "Stay back," Sarah warned the group. She raised her rebar, making herself look big. "Hey, get." The alpha, a large German shepherd mix, growled low in its throat. It didn't back down. It was hungry, or scared, or both. Mike stepped up beside Sarah. He held a heavy wrench he'd grabbed from the ambulance. "We go around," Mike said softly. "We can't," Sarah whispered. "The building on the left is on fire. The building on the right is flat. This is the choke point." Sarah banged the rebar against the hollow metal of a crushed street sign. Clang, clang. "Get out of here," she screamed, channeling every ounce of her rage and fear into the sound. The noise echoed through the ruined street. The dog flinched. It looked at the rebar, then at the fire, and decided the fight wasn't worth it. With a bark, it turned and scrambled over the debris pile, the others following. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She looked at her hands. They were trembling. "Okay," she said, her voice shaking. "Okay. Let's move." Up the hill. Hesset ahead, Oregon coast. The Lady Jane bobbed gently in the cove. Mac had been right. Devil's Elbow was protected. The massive headland of Hesset ahead had acted as a shield, deflecting the brunt of the tsunami. The water here was murky, filled with pine needles and foam, but it wasn't the churning death trap of the open coast. They had dropped the anchor in 40 feet of water. The chain rattled as it paid out, the sound shockingly loud in the stillness. "We made it," Ruiz whispered, staring up at the lighthouse. The Hesset Head lighthouse stood atop the cliff, 200 feet above them. It was white, pristine, untouched. The light was off, the power was gone, but the structure stood sentinel over the wreckage of the coast. "We aren't safe yet," Mac said, killing the engine. The silence that rushed in was absolute. No seagulls. No highway noise from Route 101. Just the slap of water. "We need to get ashore," Mac said. "We need to see if there's anyone up there. And we need fresh water." They lowered the skiff, a small aluminum dinghy strapped to the roof. Mac threw 2 survival packs into it. Flares, a first aid kit, a hunting knife, and a few cans of beans. "Ruiz, take the gaff," Mac ordered. They rowed toward the small beach at the base of the cliff. The beach was covered in driftwood, massive logs tossed around like toothpicks by the surge. Mac stepped out of the skiff, his rubber boots sinking into the wet sand. He hauled the boat up, tying it to a sturdy log. He looked up the trail that switch-backed up the cliff to the lighthouse keeper's house. "Stay close," Mac said. "I don't know who, or what, is up there." They began the climb. The trail was slick with mud. Halfway up, they found the first sign of the disaster's reach here. A car, a blue sedan, had been thrown off the highway above. It was crushed against a Sitka spruce tree, 50 feet below the road. Mac checked the car. Empty. They reached the top of the bluff. The lighthouse keeper's house sat in a grassy clearing. Mac stopped. Smoke was rising from the chimney. Someone's home, Ruiz said, hopeful. Maybe, Mac said, his hand drifting to the knife on his belt. Or maybe someone just took it. He walked toward the porch, his footsteps heavy on the gravel. He raised his hand to knock on the heavy wooden door. Before his knuckles made contact, the door swung open. A woman stood there. She was elderly, wearing a thick wool sweater, holding a double-barreled shotgun. The barrels were leveled at Mac's chest. "That's far enough," she said, her voice steady as a rock. "You boys from the government?" Mac raised his hands slowly. "No, ma'am. Fishermen. Just looking for high ground." The woman eyed them, looking at their slickers, their salt-crusted faces. She lowered the gun an inch. "Fishermen," she muttered. She looked past them, out at the ocean, where the brown stain of the tsunami was spreading toward the horizon. "Well," she said, stepping back and opening the door wide. "I suppose you better come in. The world's ended, and I just put a kettle on." Chapter 5. Triage. Marquam Hill, Portland, Oregon. The climb to OHSU was a pilgrimage of the damned. The road winding up Marquam Hill, Sam Jackson Park Road, was a slalom of fallen Douglas firs and landslide debris. Sarah Jenkins's lungs burned, the cold, damp air scraping her throat raw. Her legs, already trembling from the adrenaline dump of the last 2 hours, felt like lead weights. But she couldn't stop. Behind her, the group of 12 had grown to 30. Stragglers had joined them from the woods, emerging like ghosts from the mist. Runners caught on the trail, residents from the hillside condos, people who had just run blindly uphill when the water rose. "Almost there," Sarah wheezed, pausing to help the elderly woman over a fissure in the asphalt that vented steam. "Just around this curve." They rounded the final bend, and the hospital complex came into view. Oregon Health and Science University was a fortress of glass and steel perched precariously on the ridge line. It looked like a sci-fi citadel. To Sarah's relief, it was still standing. The intricate network of skybridges connecting the buildings swayed slightly in the aftershocks, but they held. But the scene at the entrance was pure chaos. Hundreds of people were gathered in the turnaround. Cars that had made it up before the road was blocked were abandoned haphazardly, doors open. Wounded lay on the wet pavement, covered in coats or tarps. "Mike," Sarah said, dropping her pack. "Get these people to the triage line. I need to find the charge nurse." "Where are you going?" Mike asked, eyeing the shouting crowd. "To work." Sarah pushed through the mob. The automatic doors to the emergency department were jammed open. Inside, the noise was deafening. Screaming children, shouting staff, the constant beep of monitors running on backup power. The air smelled of antiseptic, wet wool, and blood. She spotted a woman in blue scrubs standing on a plastic chair near the nurse's station, shouting orders. It was Dr. Yen, the trauma attending. Sarah knew her. She was tough as nails. "Dr. Yen," Sarah shouted, waving her ID badge. "Sarah Jenkins, Multnomah County EMS." Dr. Yen looked down, her face drawn and pale. "Jenkins? Where's your rig?" "Crushed under the Burnside Bridge. I have 30 walking wounded outside. And Mike." "Forget the walking wounded," Yen snapped, jumping down. "If they can walk, they wait. We're drowning here." We lost the blood bank cooler. The generator kicked in, but the surge blew the compressor. We have maybe 2 hours before the oneg spoils. "What do you need?" "Hands," Yen said. "We have 3 surgeons for 500 patients. I need you running secondary triage at the door. Black tag anyone who isn't going to make it. Don't waste resources." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. Black tag? Dr. Yen, we haven't even. Look outside, Sarah. Yen grabbed her shoulders, spinning her toward the glass doors. From the high vantage point of the hill, the view of Portland was apocalyptic. The city was a grid of smoke and rising water. The bridges, the lifelines of the city, were severed. The Marquam Bridge was a twisted ribbon of steel lying in the Willamette. The Ross Island Bridge had collapsed onto the highway below. The bridges are down, Yen whispered. The airport is underwater. The National Guard Armory is on the east side, cut off by the river. No helicopters are flying. She looked Sarah in the eye. Nobody is coming, Sarah. There is no backup. There is no resupply. What we have in this building right now is all we have for the next God knows how long. Sarah stared at the burning city. She understood. Okay, Sarah said, her voice hardening. She reached into her vest and pulled out a roll of triage tape. Green, yellow, red, and black. I'm on the door. Seattle, Washington. Eris Thorne was learning the geography of destruction. He had made it to the International District, skirting the edge of the downtown fires. His boots crunched on glass with every step. He stopped at the corner of Jackson Street, looking at the Union Station. The clock tower had collapsed, crushing the Grand Hall. But it was the silence of the train tracks that unsettled him. Usually, this area rumbled with Amtrak and Sounder trains. Now, the rails were twisted like licorice sticks by the ground movement. He needed water. His throat was parched. He saw a convenience store on the corner. The front window was gone. Inside, it was dark. Eris stepped over the threshold. Hello. No answer. He moved to the back, toward the coolers. The floor was slick with spilled soda and broken wine bottles. He grabbed 3 bottles of water and a handful of protein bars. He felt a pang of guilt. Looting? No, surviving. He threw a $20 bill on the counter, a meaningless gesture that made him feel slightly more human. As he turned to leave, he heard a sound from the back office. A radio. ZZZZZT. Repeat. Catastrophic failure of ZZZZT. Cascadia Subduction Zone. ZZZZT. Federal emergency declared. ZZZZT. Do not attempt to travel. Eris moved closer. It was a battery-powered emergency weather radio sitting on a desk. Tsunami warnings in effect for the entire West Coast. Waves of up to 40 feet reported in coastal sectors. Stay on high ground. The electric grid is compromised west of the Rockies. Repeat, the western interconnection has failed. Eris leaned against the doorframe, sliding down until he hit the floor. The western interconnection. The power grid for half the continent. It wasn't just Seattle. It was everything from British Columbia to Baja. If the grid was down, the pumping stations for water wouldn't work. The cell towers would die as soon as their backup batteries drained, which was probably happening right now. The gas pumps wouldn't work. He looked at his phone. No service. He thought of Maya. She was 16. She was smart, but she was a kid. She was in Bellevue, probably at her high school. I'm coming, Maya, he whispered to the empty store. He stood up, shoved the water into his pack, and walked back out into the rain. He couldn't cross the lake. He had to go south, all the way around the tip of Lake Washington in Renton. It was a marathon distance. He started jogging. Set ahead, Oregon coast. The tea was Earl Grey, served in delicate china cups that seemed absurdly civilized given the circumstances. Max sat at the small kitchen table in the lighthouse keeper's house. Ruiz was by the window, watching the cove. The old woman, who introduced herself as Martha, sat opposite Mac, the shotgun now leaning against the wall. My husband was the keeper here back in the 70s, Martha said, staring into her cup. Before they automated it. We kept the house even after he passed. I figured this old rock would outlast me. It saved us, Max said. Thank you for the tea. Don't thank me yet, Martha said. You boys have food? A few days' worth on the boat. Canned stuff. I have a pantry, she said. Canned peaches, tuna, some dried venison. Enough for a winter if it's just me. Maybe a month with 3 of us. 3 of us. Ruiz turned from the window. We can't stay here for a month. You can't go anywhere else, Martha said simply. Look at the highway. Ruiz looked back out. The section of Highway 101 visible from the window was gone. Not just blocked. Gone. A landslide had taken 1,000 feet of road and deposited it into the sea. To the north, the tunnel was collapsed. We're on an island now, Mac realized. The landslides cut us off from the north and south. The ocean is to the west. And to the east. Forest, Martha finished. Deep, thick Siuslaw National Forest. No roads. Just logging trails, and most of those will be washed out. Max stood up and walked to the window. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting a sickly yellow light on the churning ocean below. We need to secure the boat, Max said. If another surge comes, or the wind shifts, we lose it. That boat is our only way off this rock. And we need wood, Martha added. The propane tank for the stove won't last forever. We have a fireplace. We need to stockpile dry wood before the next storm hits. Mac looked at Ruiz. The deckhand looked terrified, young, and out of his depth. Ruiz, Mac said, putting a hand on the kid's shoulder. We have work to do. We're not fishermen anymore. What are we? Ruiz asked. Mac looked at Martha, then out at the ruined world. We're a colony, Mac said. Let's get to work. Chapter 6, Survival of the Fittest. Day 2, The Darkness. The sun went down, and the world disappeared. In the modern era, humans had forgotten what true darkness looked like. There was always light pollution, the orange glow of sodium street lamps, the blink of aircraft, the ambient hum of a city that never slept. But tonight, the Pacific Northwest was a black void. The Western Interconnection, the massive power grid serving the entire western half of North America, had suffered a cascading collapse. When the transmission lines severed in the Cascades and the substations in Portland and Seattle exploded, the imbalance tripped breakers all the way to Arizona. Georgetown, South Seattle. Eris Thorne huddled in the doorway of a brick warehouse, shivering. He had walked 12 miles. His feet were blistered, his socks soaked with a mixture of rain and gritty liquefaction mud. He was in Georgetown, an industrial neighborhood south of downtown, known for its breweries and old brick architecture. Now, it was a maze of shadows. The only light came from the fires burning unchecked near the Boeing Field Airport. The orange glow reflected off the low clouds, casting the streets in a flickering, hellish strobe. Eris checked his watch. 2 a.m. He couldn't stop. If he stopped, he would freeze. The temperature had dropped to 40 degrees. He tightened his pack and stepped out of the doorway. He needed to cross the Duwamish River. The main bridges were likely down, but there were smaller crossings, railway trestles. He turned the corner onto Airport Way and froze. 50 yards ahead, a flashlight beam cut through the dark. Then, another. Check the back, a voice shouted. It wasn't a call for help. It was aggressive, sharp. Eris pressed himself against the wet brick wall. Across the street, 3 men were prying open the metal shutters of a pawn shop. They weren't looting food or water. They were looting guns. Eris held his breath, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. Don't look. Just back away. His boot scraped on a piece of loose slate. The flashlight beam whipped around, blinding him. Hey! Eris didn't wait. He bolted. Get him. He's got a pack. Eris ran. He wasn't an athlete. He was a 45-year-old academic who spent his days staring at seismographs. But fear is a potent fuel. He sprinted down the alleyway, slipping on wet cardboard. Footsteps splashed behind him. Heavy boots. Faster than him. Eris turned a corner and skidded to a halt. Dead end. A chain-link fence, topped with razor wire, blocked the alley. He spun around. Two shapes emerged from the gloom. One was holding a crowbar. The other had a knife. "Nowhere to go, old man," the one with the crowbar sneered. He was young, maybe 20, wearing a Seahawks jersey over a hoodie. "Drop the bag." "I don't have anything," Eris said, his voice trembling. "Just water. Some protein bars. You can have them." "I'm gonna take the bag, and then I'm gonna check your pockets," the man said, stepping closer. "Civilization's over, buddy. Rules are gone." Eris backed up until the chain link pressed into his spine. He felt the weight of his geology rock hammer in the side loop of his backpack. It was a standard Est-wing hammer, solid steel with a pointed pick on one end. "Please," Eris said, reaching back slowly. "Drop it." The man lunged. Eris didn't think. Instinct, buried deep in the reptilian brain, took over. He swung the pack off his shoulder, using the momentum to smash it into the man's face. The man grunted, stumbling back. The second man, the one with the knife, slashed out. Eris felt a stinging burn on his forearm as the blade sliced through his jacket and skin. Eris screamed, a primal, ragged sound. He ripped the rock hammer from the loop. As the knife man lunged again, Eris swung. He didn't swing like a fighter. He swung like a geologist breaking a stubborn geode. The flat head of the hammer connected with the man's collarbone. There was a sickening crunch. The man howled, dropping the knife, clutching his shoulder. The first man, recovering from the backpack hit, looked at his friend, then at the hammer in Eris's hand, then at the wild, terrified look in Eris's eyes. "Crazy freak," the man spat. He grabbed his injured friend. "Let's go." "Not worth it." They retreated into the dark. Eris stood there, chest heaving, rain mixing with the blood dripping from his arm. He gripped the hammer so tight his hand cramped. He wasn't Eris Thorne, PhD, anymore. He was just another animal in the dark, fighting for a scrap of territory. He picked up his bag, wrapped a bandana tightly around his bleeding arm, and started walking again. He didn't put the hammer away. He kept it in his hand. OHSU Hospital, Portland. The darkness inside the hospital was worse than the darkness outside. The emergency generators were running, but they were rationing power. The hallways were dim, lit only by red emergency track lighting. The elevators were dead. Sarah Jenkins stood at the entrance to the ER. The glass doors were locked. Outside, a crowd of 200 people was pressing against the glass. They were wet, cold, and terrified. They weren't rioting, not yet, but the panic was a palpable frequency in the air. "Let us in," a woman screamed, pounding on the glass. "My baby is sick." "We have room," a young nurse whispered to Sarah. She was crying. "The lobby. We could let them in the lobby." "No," Sarah said. Her voice sounded cold to her own ears. "If we open those doors, we lose control. We have 3 security guards for the whole building. If that crowd rushes the pharmacy, or the trauma bay, we can't treat the critical patients." "So we just let them freeze?" "We triage," Sarah said. "We bring in the criticals one by one. The rest stay out." Bang. Someone threw a rock. The safety glass spiderwebbed but held. "Dr. Jenkins." Sarah turned. It was Mike. He looked exhausted. "It's the generator," Mike said. "Maintenance says we have a fuel leak. The tank must have cracked in the quake. We're losing diesel." "How long?" Sarah asked. 6 hours. Maybe 8. Sarah closed her eyes. Without power, the ventilators stopped. The suction pumps stopped. The lights went out. "We need fuel," Sarah said. "Where do we get diesel on top of a mountain?" "There's a construction site," Mike said. "Down the hill, near the VA hospital. They had a tanker truck for the excavators. If it's still there." "If it hasn't been looted," Sarah corrected. She looked at the angry crowd outside. Then she looked at the patients lining the hallway behind her, people clinging to life by the thread of modern medicine. We have to go get it, Sarah said. You and me. We need siphons and jerry cans. Going back out there? Mike looked at the shattered glass of the door. It's a war zone, Sarah. I know, Sarah said, checking the trauma shears in her vest. But if the lights go out, everyone in here dies anyway. Heceta Head Lighthouse. It was the quiet that kept Mac awake. He sat on the porch of the keeper's house, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders. The rain had stopped, leaving a sky full of stars. Without the light pollution from the cities, the Milky Way was a brilliant, jagged scar across the heavens. Down in the cove, he could hear the Lady Jane straining at her anchor chain as the tide shifted. Can't sleep. Mac didn't turn. He heard the creak of the floorboards. Martha stepped out, holding a lantern turned low. Thinking about the boat, Mac said. It's a good boat, Martha said, sitting in the rocking chair next to him. It's a target, Mac said. Anyone walking down the coast, anyone desperate, they see that boat, they see a way out. We're miles from anyone, Martha said. Not for long, Mac replied. People will move. They'll move away from the cities, away from the fires. They'll come to the coast looking for food. The ocean is the only grocery store left. He pointed to the dark tree line surrounding the clearing. We need to fortify, Mac said. Blocking the trail isn't enough. We need a watch schedule. We need to know if someone is coming before they knock on the door. Martha was silent for a moment. Then she reached into the pocket of her wool cardigan and pulled out a key. The lighthouse tower, she said. The lens room at the top. You can see 10 miles in every direction during the day. And the acoustic overlap, the way the cliffs are shaped, you can hear footsteps on the gravel trail from the gallery deck. She handed him the key. You're not a fisherman anymore, are you, Mac? Mac took the key. The cold metal felt heavy in his palm. He thought about the radio screams he had heard. He thought about the floating hotel. No, Mac said softly. I'm the captain of this rock. He stood up. I'll take first watch in the tower. Wake Ruiz in 4 hours. As Mac climbed the spiral stairs of the lighthouse, ascending into the dark, he realized the truth of the new world. The earthquake hadn't just broken the ground. It had broken the contract between people. Now, it was simple. Protect your own. Or die. Eris shined the light toward the ceiling, which was now the sidewall. Hanging from a luggage rack, entangled in the metal bars, was a man. He was wearing a conductor's uniform. His leg was twisted at an impossible angle, caught in the crushed metal of the doorframe. He was dangling over the pile of the dead. I see you, Eris shouted. Hold on. Eris squeezed through the broken window. He slid down a row of seats, grabbing a handrail to stop himself from falling into the water below. My leg, the conductor groaned. He was young, his face a mask of shock. I can't get it loose. Eris climbed across the seats, bracing himself against the tilt. He reached the man. The metal doorframe had buckled, pinning the man's ankle like a steel trap. Eris pulled. It was solid. I need a lever, Eris muttered. He looked around. He saw a fire axe mounted in a glass case on the wall, 10 feet away. He scrambled for it, smashed the glass with his elbow, and grabbed the axe. Okay, Eris said, climbing back. I'm going to pry the metal. When I do, you have to pull. You understand. The conductor nodded weakly. Eris jammed the blade of the axe into the gap in the metal. He braced his feet against a seat and pulled. His injured arm screamed in protest, the stitches tearing, fresh blood soaking his bandage. Pull! Eris roared. The metal groaned. The gap widened by an inch. The conductor screamed, yanking his leg. He fell free. He tumbled down, splashing into the water below. Eris scrambled down after him, grabbing him by the collar before he could go under. He dragged the man up the slope of the seats, inch by inch, until they reached the broken window. They collapsed on the side of the train, in the rain. You saved me, the conductor wept. clutching Eris's jacket. Everyone else, they drowned in the mud. But you saved me. Eris looked at his own arm. The blood was flowing freely now. He looked at the vast, ruined valley around them. He had saved one. Out of thousands. Can you walk? Eris asked. I don't think so. Eris sighed. He looked east, toward the distant lights of Renton, toward the long way around the lake, toward Maya. Carrying this man would slow him down. It might kill him. But he looked at the conductor's face. He was someone's son. Maybe someone's father. Okay, Eris said, helping the man stand on his good leg. Lean on me. We're going to the ridge. We're getting out of the soup. Heseta Head Lighthouse. Max stood in the lantern room, surrounded by the massive Fresnel lens. The glass prisms, usually a beacon of light, were dark and cold. He held the binoculars to his eyes. The sun was rising, casting a pale, gray light over the Pacific. The ocean was calmer today, but the coastline was changed forever. He scanned the north. The highway was gone. He scanned the east. The forest was dense, impenetrable. He scanned the south. He stopped. Miles down the coast, near the sea lion caves, a thin column of black smoke was rising. It wasn't a forest fire. It was rhythmic. Puff, puff, puff. Someone was burning tires. Someone was signaling. Mac lowered the glasses. He wasn't the only captain left on the coast. He opened the hatch to the gallery deck and looked down at the house. Ruiz was chopping wood. Martha was tending the garden. They were building a home. But the smoke in the distance was a reminder. Neighbors were coming. And in a world without laws, neighbors weren't always friends. Mac gripped the railing. Let them come, he whispered. Chapter 8, The Dead of Night. OHSU Hospital, Portland. 10 gallons of diesel. In a pickup truck, 10 gallons gets you 200 miles. In a massive industrial generator designed to power a level 1 trauma center, 10 gallons gets you about 40 minutes. Sarah Jenkins poured the second jerry can into the auxiliary tank. Her hands were black with oil and mud. Beside her, the hospital's facility manager, a gray-haired man named Thompson, watched the fuel gauge. That's it? Thompson asked, his voice flat. That's all we could get, Sarah said, screwing the cap back on. How long? Thompson did the math, staring at the vibrating beast of an engine. If I cut the HVAC completely, kill the lights in the hallways, and shut down the imaging lab, maybe an hour. Hour and a half, if we pray. Sarah wiped her forehead, leaving a streak of grease. Do it. Power only to the OR and the ICU. Everything else goes dark. Dr. Jenkins, Thompson said, stopping her as she turned to leave. The ICU, it's drawing the most load. The ventilators. The suction. The monitors. Sarah stopped. She knew what he was asking. Keep them on, she said. For now. She walked back into the ER. The change was immediate. As Thompson threw the breakers, the overhead fluorescent lights died, replaced by the sickly yellow glow of battery-powered emergency floods. The hum of the air conditioning ceased, leaving a sudden, suffocating silence that was quickly filled by the groans of patients. Dr. Yen met her at the nurse's station. We have power, Sarah said. But not for long. 90 minutes max. Yen nodded slowly. She looked like she had aged 10 years in 10 hours. She held a clipboard. We have 12 patients on ventilators, Yen said softly. 4 in the OR. 8 in the ICU. Okay, Sarah said. Sarah. Yen's voice was steel wrapped in velvet. When the generator dies, the vents stop. We have 3 ambu bags and 4 nurses available to bag manually. We can't keep 12 people alive. The math was brutal. Simple subtraction. 12 minus 3 equals 9. 9 people were going to die when the fuel ran out. Who are they? Sarah asked, her stomach twisting. Bed 1 is a 70-year-old with COPD. Bed 4 is a trauma victim, crushed chest, unlikely to survive the night even with the machine. Bed 6. Yen paused. Bed 6 is a 6-year-old girl. Head injury. Sarah looked at the row of curtained bays. We prioritize the kids, Sarah said. And the ones with the highest survivability. That means pulling the plug on bed 1 and bed 4 right now, Yen said. To save power for the others. Sarah looked at her hands. They were designed to save lives, not end them. But the earthquake had rewritten the Hippocratic Oath. First, do no harm had become first. Ensure the survival of the species. I'll do it, Sarah whispered. No, Yen said, putting a hand on Sarah's shoulder. You got the fuel. You bought us this time. I'll do the rest. Yen walked toward bed 1. Sarah turned away, unable to watch. She walked to the glass doors of the entrance. Mike was there, sitting on the floor, guarding the door with a fire extinguisher. He looked up at her. We did good, right? Mike asked, seeing the look on her face. We saved them. Sarah looked at the darkness consuming the city below. We bought them an hour, she said. We bought them an hour to say goodbye. Beacon Hill, South Seattle. The climb out of the liquefaction valley was a slow, muddy agony. Eris Thorne and the conductor, whose name was Evan, moved like a single, crippled organism. Evan's arm was draped over Eris's shoulders. Eris's arm was wrapped around Evan's waist. Every step up the ridge sent a jolt of pain through Eris's injured forearm. The bandage was soaked through, the blood sticky and cold. I have to stop, Evan gasped. His face was the color of old paper. Eris, please. Eris looked up. They were halfway up the slope of Beacon Hill. A residential street lay just ahead, the houses dark and tilted but seemingly intact. Just to that porch, Eris grunted. Come on. They stumbled onto the lawn of a small craftsman bungalow. Eris lowered Evan onto the wooden steps and collapsed beside him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They just breathed, watching the steam rise from their clothes in the cold air. Below them, the Duwamish Valley was a black lake of destruction. The fires near the airport had died down, leaving only smoldering red eyes in the dark. Why did you do it? Evan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Do what? Come down into the train. You could have kept walking. Eris touched the pocket of his jacket, where his wallet held a picture of Maya. If it was my daughter in that train, Eris said, I'd want someone to come down. Evan nodded, closing his eyes. I have a girlfriend. In Tacoma. She was waiting for me to get off shift. We'll get you to a phone, Eris said, though he knew there were no phones. Or we'll find a radio. Eris looked at his arm. He peeled back the edge of the sodden bandage. The cut was deep, jagged. The edges were angry and red. It needed stitches. It needed antibiotics. We need to get inside, Eris said, looking at the dark house. It's freezing. He stood up, swaying slightly. He walked to the front door and tried the handle. Locked. He raised his rock hammer. He didn't want to break the glass. The noise was a liability, but he had no choice. Smash. He reached in, unlocked the deadbolt, and pushed the door open. The house smelled of stale air and potpourri. It was silent. Hello, Eris called out. Anyone home? We need help. Silence. He went back, hauled Evan up, and dragged him into the living room. He deposited him on a floral sofa. I'm going to find supplies, Eris said. He moved to the kitchen. The drawers had been rifled through. Someone had been here in a hurry and left. The silverware was gone. The pantry was mostly empty, just a jar of pickles and some stale crackers. But in the bathroom, Eris struck gold. In the medicine cabinet, behind a bottle of expired cough syrup, was a small orange bottle. Amoxicillin. Leftover from a dental surgery, judging by the date. Eris swallowed 2 pills dry. He grabbed a bottle of rubbing alcohol and a clean towel. He went back to the living room. Evan was shivering violently. Shock and hypothermia. Evan, Eris said, shaking him. Stay with me. Eris found a decorative quilt on the back of the sofa and wrapped it around the young man. We sleep here tonight, Eris said, sitting in the armchair across from him, the rock hammer in his lap. Tomorrow, we head for the lake.
Eris. Yeah, thank you. Eris didn't answer. He just stared at the front door, waiting for the sun or the looters, whichever came first. Cascadia Head Lighthouse. Mac Mackenzie was building a wall. He and Ruiz had spent the last 4 hours dragging driftwood logs from the beach up the switchback trail. It was backbreaking work, hauling the waterlogged timber up 200 feet of elevation. But fear is a great motivator. They piled the logs across the narrowest point of the trail, about 50 yards below the house. It wasn't a fortress wall. Anyone determined could climb over it, but it was a barrier.
It would slow people down.
It would make noise. That's the last one. Ruiz panted, dropping a massive cedar branch onto the pile. He collapsed onto the wet grass, chest heaving. Max stood looking down at the pile. It looked pathetic against the backdrop of the massive disaster, but it was something. Good work, Max said. Do you really think they'll come? Ruiz asked. Maybe the smoke. Maybe they're just survivors like us. Maybe they need help. Mac looked south toward the Sea Lion Caves. The smoke had stopped, swallowed by the night. In the ocean, Mac said quietly, when a whale dies, the sharks come from miles away. They smell the blood in the water. Right now, the whole world smells like blood. He offered a hand to Ruiz and pulled him up. Go get some sleep. I'll take the first watch in the tower. Mac walked up to the lighthouse. He climbed the spiral stairs, the metallic clang-clang-clang echoing in the shaft. He reached the lantern room. The glass was cold against his forehead. He looked out at the sea. It was a vast, breathing void. Then he saw it.
It wasn't smoke this time.
It was a light. Far out to sea, maybe 5 miles offshore, a single, solitary light blinked.
Plup, plup, dash.
It wasn't a lighthouse. It wasn't a star. It was a ship. Mac raised his binoculars. He couldn't make out the shape, but the light was steady now. A searchlight, sweeping the water. A ship meant rescue. A ship meant the Navy or the Coast Guard. But as Mac watched, the light turned. It swept across the coastline. It lingered on the cliffs. And then it went dark. Mac waited. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. The light didn't come back. Whoever was out there wasn't broadcasting their position. They were hunting. Mac went back down the stairs, moving faster this time. He went to the kitchen where Martha was sleeping in her chair. He shook her gently. Martha, he whispered, where do you keep the shells for that shotgun? Martha opened one eye. Top shelf of the pantry. Behind the oats. Why? Because, Mac said, checking the bolt of the door, I don't think we're the only ones who survived the wave. The men dragged the boat up the beach. They weren't looking for survivors. They were looking at a container that had washed ashore, a blue metal shipping container, battered but intact, sitting in the surf. One of the men produced a portable angle grinder. The sound of the tool screaming against the metal lock drifted up the cliff on the wind. Mac watched as they popped the doors. They disappeared inside. A moment later, they emerged carrying crates. What are they doing? Mac jumped. Ruiz had crawled up beside him. Keep your head down, Mac hissed, pushing Ruiz's face into the grass. Who are they? Ruiz whispered. Vultures, Mac said. They're stripping cargo. Should we hail them? Maybe they can take us. Look at the boat, Ruiz, Mac interrupted. Look at the bow. Ruiz squinted. There was no registration number, no name, but there was something else. A machine gun mount. It was empty, but the pivot was there. They aren't rescuers, Mac said grimly. They're raiders. If they see the lighthouse, if they see the smoke from our chimney, they'll come for us, Ruiz finished, his face paling. Mac slid backward, crab-walking away from the cliff edge until they were under the cover of the spruce trees. We need to go back, Mac said. We need to kill the fire. No smoke, no lights, and we need to hide the Lady Jane. Hide a 40-foot trawler?
How?
We cut the mast, Mac said. We cover it with nets and branches. We make it look like wreckage. They ran back down the trail toward the lighthouse. The peace of the morning was gone. The ocean hadn't just brought destruction, it had brought the worst of humanity to their doorstep. As they reached the house, Martha met them on the porch. She held the shotgun. "I heard the grinder," she said calmly. "How many?" "3 on the beach. Maybe more on the ship offshore," Max said. "They coming this way?" "Not yet. They're busy with the container. But once they pick it clean, they'll look for the next prize," Martha nodded. She cracked the shotgun open, checking the shells. "Well, let them come. This is federal land, and I'm the keeper." Mac looked at the old woman, then at the terrified Ruiz. He realized that the earthquake was just the opening act. The real disaster was just beginning. "Ruiz, get the axe," Mac ordered. "We have a boat to camouflage." Chapter 10. The Choke Point. Gateway District, East Portland. The exodus had stalled. Sarah Jenkins stood on the hood of an abandoned F-150, looking east along Interstate 84. What she saw made her heart hammer against her ribs. It wasn't just her group of 40. It was thousands. The long walk had channeled the desperate population of Portland into a funnel. People from the flooded downtown, the burning Pearl District, and the crumbled East Side had all pushed toward the only perceived exit, the terrifyingly narrow gorge of the Columbia River. But at the Gateway Interchange, where I-205 met I-84, the road had died. A massive overpass, the ramp connecting the two freeways, had pancaked. It lay across the eastbound lanes like a concrete tombstone, 50 feet high and 200 feet wide. "We can't get through," Mike said, climbing up beside her. He looked at the sea of heads, a chaotic, undulating mass of humanity pressed against the blockade. There was shouting, shoving, the wail of children. It was a pressure cooker waiting to explode. "We can't go back," Sarah said, watching the smoke rising from the city center behind them. "And we can't stay here. If the crowd panics, we get trampled." She scanned the terrain. To the left, the train tracks and the river flooded. To the right, the steep embankment leading up to the rocky bluff of Rocky Butte. "The butte," Sarah pointed. "We have to go up and over. Flank the blockade." With the patience, Mike looked at the steep, muddy slope covered in blackberry brambles and slick grass. Dr. Yen can barely walk. The kids. "We carry them," Sarah said. "We form a chain. If we stay on the highway, we die." She jumped down. "Listen up," she screamed, her voice hoarse. "We are leaving the road. Everyone grab partner. If you have 2 good legs, you are carrying a pack or a person." They moved off the pavement. The mud on the embankment was treacherous. Immediately, people slipped. A man with a broken arm cried out as he fell into the thorns. "Keep moving," Sarah yelled, grabbing the back of the man's jacket and hauling him up. As they climbed, they attracted attention. People in the main crowd saw them moving. "Hey, they know a way out," someone shouted. "Follow them." Suddenly, the trickle of Sarah's group became a flood. Hundreds of strangers began scrambling up the slope after them. The orderly evacuation turned into a stampede. Faster. Sarah urged her group, "Get to the trees." They crested the ridge of the butte just as the slope below them descended into chaos. People were pulling each other down, fighting for handholds in the mud. Sarah looked back from the tree line. It looked like a scene from Dante's Inferno. "Don't look," she told the little girl she was carrying. "Just look at the trees, honey. Look at the trees." They had cleared the bottleneck, but they had left humanity behind. Newcastle, south of Seattle. Eris Thorne realized that money still had value, but the currency had changed. It wasn't dollars anymore. It was walls. He and Evan had skirted the edge of Lake Washington, moving into the hills of Newcastle. This was an area of golf courses and mansions, hidden behind gates. Now, those gates were manned. They rounded a bend in the road and found themselves staring at a barricade that put the previous one to shame. 3 SUVs were parked nose to tail across the road. Behind them, a chain-link fence had been hastily reinforced with plywood. Standing atop the center SUV was a man in tactical gear holding a hunting rifle. "Turn around," the man commanded. His voice was amplified by a megaphone. "This is a private community. No entry." Evan leaned heavily on his makeshift crutch. "We just need water," he rasped. "Please." "We have no surplus," the man said, raising the rifle slightly. "Turn around." Eris stepped forward, raising his hands. He saw the patch on the man's vest, a private security firm logo. These weren't just neighbors. This was hired muscle. "My name is Dr. Eris Thorne," Eris shouted. "I'm a seismologist with the University of Washington." The man hesitated. So, I know what's coming next." Eris lied or half-lied. "I know about the Howard Hansen Dam." The rifle lowered an inch. Everyone in the Green River Valley knew about the dam. If it failed, everything from Kent to Renton would be underwater in hours. "What about the dam?" the guard asked. "I need to speak to whoever is in charge," Eris said. "I have data on the structural integrity of the spillway. If you guys are camped out here, you might be in the inundation zone." The guard looked at his partner, who was holding a radio. They whispered for a moment. "Open the gate," the guard said. "But just him. The cripple stays outside." "No," Eris said firmly. "We come in together. Or I walk away, and you can guess whether you're going to drown tonight." The guard glared at him. Eris held his gaze. He channeled every ounce of academic arrogance he had ever used in a grant review board. "Open it," the radio crackled. The gate swung open. Eris grabbed Evan's arm. "Walk tall," he whispered. "We're not refugees. We're consultants." They walked past the SUVs. Inside the perimeter, the world changed. There were generators humming. A communal kitchen was set up in a driveway. People were drinking bottled water. A woman in a North Face jacket approached them. She looked like a CEO, sharp, tired, dangerous. "I'm Karen," she said. "You're the seismologist. Talk fast. Is the dam holding?" Eris looked at the comfortable setup. He looked at Evan, who was about to pass out. "Food first," Eris said. "And antibiotics for his leg. Then I tell you what the P-wave said." Karen studied him. She saw the blood on his arm, the rock hammer in his belt. She nodded. "Get them a plate," she ordered a nearby teenager. "And get the first aid kit." Eris exhaled. He had bought them a night of safety with a lie. He had no idea if the dam was holding. But in the apocalypse, information was leverage, even if it was fabricated. Haseda ahead, Oregon coast. The sound was what terrified Mac. It wasn't a roar or a crash. It was a buzz. A high-pitched, angry hornet sound. "Freeze," Mac hissed. He and Ruiz were waist-deep in the water of the cove, wrestling a massive spruce bough over the cabin of the Lady Jane. They had cut the mast down with a hacksaw, a painful hour of labor, to lower the boat's profile. Now, a white quadcopter drone hovered 200 feet above the cove. It sat there, perfectly still against the wind, its camera eye fixed on the water. Did it see us? Ruiz whispered, his face pressed against the wet fiberglass of the hull. "Don't move," Max said. "The camo net is up. If we don't move, we're just driftwood." The drone loitered. It panned left toward the rocks, then right toward the trail leading up to the lighthouse. Max's hand drifted to the flare gun in his pocket. It was a useless weapon against a drone at that height, but the urge to fight back was overwhelming. The drone was scouting. The raiders on the beach, the ones stripping the container, were methodical. They weren't just grabbing what washed up, they were mapping the assets of the coast. A lighthouse was a strategic asset. A 40-foot trawler was a prize. After an agonizing minute, the drone dipped its nose and zipped away, heading south back toward the salvage boat. Mac let out a breath. "They know," Ruiz said, shivering. "They have to know." "Maybe," Mac said, wading out of the water. "But they aren't coming tonight. It'll be dark in an hour." He looked up at the lighthouse. It was a beacon, yes, but it was also a fortress. The tower had thick walls. The spiral stair was a narrow choke point. "We need to change the game," Max said. "How?" "We stop hiding," Max said. "If they come up that trail, we make sure they regret it." He walked over to the pile of fishing gear they had stripped from the boat. He picked up a coil of heavy monofilament line and a box of large, rusted shark hooks. You ever set a trot line, Ruiz? For catfish. For sharks, Max said grimly. We're going to rig the trail, knee height, and we're going to use the flares. He looked at the darkening sky. They have guns. They have drones. But they don't know this rock. Tonight, we turn the trail into a nightmare. Chapter 11. The Sanctuary. The Grotto, northeast Portland. The descent from Rocky Butte was worse than the climb. In the pitch black, the group slid down the muddy northern face, tearing clothes on blackberry thorns and stumbling over exposed roots. Sarah Jenkins moved up and down the line, a shepherd counting lost sheep. Keep contact. Hand on the shoulder of the person in front of you. They bottomed out near Sandy Boulevard. The noise of the interstate was gone, replaced by the eerie sound of wind whistling through the fir trees. We need cover, Dr. Yen wheezed. She was supporting a man with a shattered ankle, her face pale with exhaustion. The temperature is dropping. If we stay in the open, the hypothermia will finish what the quake started. Sarah looked around. To their right, looming out of the darkness, was a massive rock face. At its base, a manicured garden. The grotto, Sarah realized. The national sanctuary of our sorrowful mother. A Catholic shrine built into the cliffside. It had caves. It had buildings. This way. Sarah signaled. They breached the gate, moving past the statues of saints that seemed to watch them with stone indifference. They found the main chapel, a large, open-air structure that offered no warmth, but next to it was the visitor center and gift shop. Mike smashed the glass door with a fire extinguisher. Inside, move. The 40 survivors piled into the shop. It smelled of scented candles and rosary beads. It wasn't large, but it was dry, and the wind was cut off. Clear the shelves, Sarah ordered. Get the patients on the floor. Use the t-shirts, the blankets, anything for warmth. Within minutes, the gift shop was converted into a field hospital. Crucifixes looked down on bloody bandages. Sarah slumped against the counter, sliding down until she hit the floor. Her legs were vibrating with fatigue. Dr. Yen approached her. She wasn't holding a clipboard anymore. She was holding a sweatshirt. Put this on, Yen said gently. How are they? Sarah asked, rubbing her eyes. We lost bed 4, Yen said. Her voice was flat, professional. The chest trauma, the jostling on the descent, his lung collapsed. I couldn't decompress it in the dark. Sarah closed her eyes. 1 down, 39 to go. And the little girl? The head injury? Stable.
For now.
But she needs a surgeon, Sarah. Real surgery, not a gift shop floor. Sarah looked at the huddled masses. They were safe for the night. But tomorrow? We rest until first light, Sarah said. Then we hit the train tracks. We follow the Union Pacific Line east. It's flat. It leads to the gorge. And if the tracks are gone, then we walk on the ballast, Sarah said. She reached out and took the sweatshirt. On the front, in cheerful letters, it read, Faith moves mountains. Sarah let out a dry, humorless laugh. Let's hope it can move 30 miles of rubble. Newcastle, south of Seattle. The soup was canned minestrone, heated over a camping stove, but to Eris, it tasted like a Michelin star meal. He sat at a folding table in the garage of the command house. Evan was asleep on a cot in the corner, his leg elevated and bandaged with clean gauze. The antibiotics were already in his system. Karen, the leader of the enclave, sat across from Eris. She was drinking red wine from a crystal glass. A topographic map of the Green River Valley was spread out between them.
Show me, she said.
Eris swallowed the last spoonful of soup. The lie had to be perfect. He pointed to the blue line of the Howard Hansen Dam. The dam is an earth-fill structure, Eris began, channeling a lecture he had given to undergraduates 100 times. It sits on volcanic bedrock, but the spillway is concrete. He traced a finger down the valley. The earthquake was a 9.2. The duration was 4 minutes. That kind of energy creates a phenomenon called seiche in the reservoir behind the dam. The water sloshes back and forth with massive force. He looked Karen in the eye. The water hammered the spillway gates. The data I saw before the sensors cut out showed a pressure spike of 300%. The gates are compromised. They can't hold the head pressure. Karen swirled her wine. She was studying his face, looking for the tick, the sweat, the tell. So, why isn't the valley flooded yet? She asked. Because the dam hasn't burst, Eris said. It's leaking. Piping. Water is finding a path through the earthen embankment. It starts small. Muddy water at the toe of the dam. Then a hole. Then catastrophic failure. He tapped the map right over the city of Kent. When it goes, it releases a wall of water 30 feet high. It hits Kent in 20 minutes. It hits Renton in 40. This hill, this enclave, you're at 300 feet elevation. You're safe from the water. Then why are you here? Karen asked. If you knew we were safe, why warn us? Because Eris leaned in. When the valley floods, the rats swim to the island. Everyone in the valley is going to try to come up here. You have a wall, sure. But do you have enough bullets for 50,000 people? Karen went still. That was the button. Fear of the masses. Chapter 12. The Yellow Fog. Union Pacific Railroad, East Portland. The railroad tracks were a different kind of torture. Sarah had thought the mud was bad, but the ballast, the sharp, angular chunks of granite that supported the rails, was designed to lock together under the weight of a freight train. Under the soles of hiking boots and sneakers, it was unstable, shifting with every step, twisting ankles, and shredding rubber. The group of 40 moved in a ragged line. To their left, the floodwaters of the Columbia River lapped against the embankment, a slurry of brown water and debris. To their right, the sheer basalt cliffs of the gorge rose up, weeping groundwater. Keep the pace, Sarah shouted, though her own legs felt like wood. We need to make Troutdale by noon. Dr. Yen was walking beside her, using a piece of driftwood as a cane. Her face was gray. Sarah, Yen whispered, sniffing the air. Do you smell that? Sarah stopped. She inhaled. It wasn't a smell of rot or smoke or mud. It was sharp, chemical, like a swimming pool that had been shocked with too much cleaner.
Bleach.
Chlorine, Sarah said, her blood running cold. She looked ahead. A mile down the track, a freight train had derailed. The cars were accordion crumped against the cliff face. One of the tankers, a white cylinder marked with a diamond hazard placard, was breached. A low, pale yellow mist was leaking from the rupture. It wasn't rising. Chlorine gas is heavier than air. It was hugging the ground, filling the low points between the tracks and the river, creating a lake of toxic fog that blocked their path. Everyone stop. Sarah screamed, waving her arms. Back. Move back. The group halted, confusion rippling through the line. What is it? Mike asked, jogging up. Chlorine gas. Sarah pointed to the yellow haze. If we walk through that, our lungs turn to liquid. We drown on dry land. We can't go back, Mike said, looking at the exhausted survivors. We can't swim the river. Sarah looked up. The cliff face here wasn't vertical. It was a steep scree slope of loose rock and scrub oak, climbing 300 feet up to the historic Columbia River Highway. We go up, Sarah said. Gas sinks. We have to get above it. Sarah, look at them, Yen argued. We have people on crutches. We have a child with a head injury. They can't climb a 40-degree grade. They climb or they die, Sarah said grimly. The wind is shifting. That cloud is coming toward us. She turned to the group. Listen to me. There is a chemical leak ahead. We need altitude. Drop the heavy packs. Keep the food, keep the water. Drop the rest. We are climbing to the old highway. The panic was immediate. People scrambled for the slope. Slow down, Sarah ordered. Form a chain, strongest at the top, pulling the others up. Sarah grabbed the little girl with the head bandage. I've got you, she whispered. She hoisted the child onto her back, wrapping the girl's arms around her neck. She started to climb. The loose rock slid under her boots. For every 2 steps up, she slid 1 step back. Her lungs burned. Below them, the yellow fog began to creep along the tracks, silent and deadly, swallowing the path they had just walked. Newcastle, south of Seattle. Eris Thorne stared at the Starlink dish sitting on the patio table. It was their lifeline to the truth, and therefore, the greatest threat to his survival. "It's searching," Karen said, tapping her finger on the table. "Satellites are moving. Connection is spotty." Eris stood by the sliding glass door. The guard was outside, smoking a cigarette, rifle slung over his shoulder. Evan was inside, resting. "The alignment is off," Eris said casually. The earthquake shifted the ground. "The dish needs to be recalibrated to the new azimuth." Karen looked at him suspicious. "You know how to do that?" "I'm a field geologist," Eris said. "I set up remote sensing stations in the Andes. I know satellite comms." He stepped toward the table. Karen hesitated, her hand hovering near the pistol on her belt. "Don't break it," she warned. "I'm just going to check the servo motor," Eris said. He knelt by the dish. His hands were trembling. He needed to disable it without looking like he broke it. If he smashed it, they'd shoot him. It had to look like a hardware failure. He located the cable that connected the dish to the router. It was a proprietary connector. "Hand me that screwdriver?" Eris asked, pointing to a multi-tool on the table. Karen handed it to him, watching his every move. Eris pretended to tighten the mounting bracket. As he did, he used his body to block her line of sight for a fraction of a second. He jammed the tip of the screwdriver into the female port of the cable connection, bending the delicate copper pins inside. Snap. A tiny sound. Felt more than heard. He pulled the tool back and stood up. "Bracket is tight. Try it now." Karen looked at her phone app. Starlink disconnected. "Check cable." "It's not connecting," she said, frowning. "It says check cable." "Probably the internal wire." Eris shrugged, wiping his sweaty palms on his jeans. The quake vibration probably microfractured the solder points inside the connector. "It happens." Karen glared at the dish, then at Eris. "Can you fix it? Without a soldering iron and a magnifying glass?" "No." Karen cursed, slamming her phone on the table. "Great. So we're blind." "We're not blind," Eris said softly. "You have eyes. You have the high ground, and you have me." Karen stared at him. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken threat. "You better be right about that dam, Eris," she said, her voice low. "Because if the water doesn't come, I'm going to wonder why I'm feeding you." "It's coming," Eris lied, his heart hammering against his ribs. Physics doesn't lie. But as he looked out at the valley below, dry and ruined, he prayed that for once, physics would hurry up. Cascadia Head Lighthouse. The siege had begun. Max sat in the lantern room, the binoculars pressed to his eyes. The headache from the adrenaline crash was throbbing behind his temples. The black salvage ship hadn't left. It was anchored a mile out, just beyond the reach of any rifle. But they had deployed a smaller boat, a fast Zodiac. It was patrolling back and forth across the mouth of the cove. "They're blocking us in," Ruiz said, sitting on the metal grating of the deck. "They know we have a boat," Max said. "They don't want to come up the trail again, not after the hooks. They want to starve us out. Or wait until we try to run. So we can't fish."
"No."
Max scanned the ship. He saw movement on the deck. A man was setting up something on a tripod. "Get down," Mac yelled. He grabbed Ruiz and dragged him to the floor.
Boom.
A second later, whiz-crack. Rock exploded from the cliff face 20 feet below the lantern room. Shards of granite pinged against the glass. "Sniper." Ruiz shrieked. 50 cal, Max said, dust raining down on them. "Or a heavy hunting rifle. They're rangy." He crawled to the edge and peeked over the sill. The man on the ship fired again.
Boom.
This time, the shot didn't hit the tower. It hit the solar panels mounted on the roof of the keeper's house below. Glass shattered. The panels that charged the battery bank, their only source of light and power, splintered into useless silicon dust. "They aren't trying to kill us," Mac realized. "They're degrading our infrastructure. They're taking out the lights. Then the water tank. Then the chimney." "Why?" Because they want a lighthouse intact, Mac said. It's a fortress. They want to live here. We're just the squatters. Mac looked at the ruined solar panels. Without power, they had no way to recharge the radios. No light at night to spot intruders. We can't sit here, Mac said. If we sit here, they pick us apart piece by piece. So what do? Attack a ship with a spear gun? No, Mac said. We go dark. We let them think they won. We let them think we ran away into the woods. He looked at the dense forest to the east. We evacuate the house, Mac said. We move the food and the weapons into the old mine shaft. The what? There's a sea cave at the base of the North Cliff. Smugglers used it in the 20s. It connects to a fissure in the rock. We move in there. We let them come ashore. We let them take the house. Mac's eyes hardened. And once they're inside, once they're sleeping in our beds, then we hunt them. Chapter 13. The Stone Lantern. Crown Point, Oregon. The wind at the top of the gorge didn't blow. It punched. Sarah Jenkins crested the rim of the basalt cliff, her fingers bleeding from clawing at the loose scree. She hauled the little girl, whose name she learned was Emily, over the lip of the stone wall. Get down, Sarah screamed over the roar of the gale. The Columbia River gorge acts as a wind tunnel. In winter, the pressure differential between the high desert to the east and the ocean to the west creates distinct, violent wind events. Up here, at Crown Point, the gusts were hitting 70 miles per hour. The group of 40 collapsed onto the pavement of the historic Columbia River Highway. They were gasping, covered in mud, their sweat freezing instantly in the sub-zero wind chill. We can't stay here, Mike yelled, crawling toward her. The wind chill will kill them in 10 minutes. Sarah looked up. Looming above them in the gray twilight was the Vista House. It was an architectural marvel built in 1917, a massive, octagonal stone rotunda with a green tiled roof, perched on the very edge of the precipice like a German bunker. Inside, Sarah ordered, "Break the door." Mike and two other men scrambled toward the heavy oak doors. They were locked. Mike grabbed a heavy rock from the landscaping and smashed the glass pane of the side window. He reached in, unlocked the latch, and threw the door open. Move. Everyone inside. The group stumbled into the rotunda. The silence inside was shocking. The thick sandstone walls cut the wind noise to a dull thrum. But it wasn't warm. The interior was lined with Alaskan marble. It was beautiful, echoing, and freezing cold. It's a mausoleum, Dr. Yen chattered, her teeth clicking together. She slid down the wall, clutching her chest. It's shelter, Sarah said, dropping her pack. She scanned the room. There was no furniture, just the marble benches and the central information desk. We need heat, Sarah said. We dropped the sleeping bags. There's a fireplace downstairs, a teenager said, in the gift shop area. I've been here on field trips. Check it, Sarah commanded. They went down the spiral marble stairs. The lower level was darker, but there was indeed a fireplace, a decorative electric insert. Useless without power. We burned the displays, Sarah said, her eyes hard. The wooden racks, the books, the brochures, everything. Sarah, Mike whispered, there's no chimney. If we light a fire in here... We open the upper windows for a draft, Sarah said. We manage the smoke. But if we don't get core temperatures up, people start dying of hypothermia within the hour. She walked over to a display of history books. She grabbed a stack of geology of the gorge and ripped the pages out. Start the pile, she said. 10 minutes later, a small, smoky fire was crackling in the center of the marble floor on the lower level. 40 people huddled around it, shoulder to shoulder, a human mass trying to share BTUs. Sarah sat on the outer ring, shivering. She looked at the smoke drifting up the spiral staircase toward the dome. It was a beacon. Anyone looking up at Crown Point from the river or the road would see the Vista House glowing. But for tonight, they were alive. They were the keepers of the flame in the stone lantern. Newcastle, south of Seattle. Eris Thorne knew the anatomy of a lie. It had a birth, a life, and a death. His lie about the dam was in its terminal phase. He stood in the garage, watching the guard through the window. The guard was bored, scrolling through downloaded music on his phone. Eris, Evan whispered from the cot. You've been staring at that fence for an hour. There's a shift change at 6 p.m., Eris said quietly. They swapped the perimeter patrols. For about 5 minutes, the line of sight from the main house to the golf course gate is blocked by the trees. We're making a run for it. We have to. Karen is smart. She's going to realize the water isn't rising. Or she's going to find a battery-powered radio and hear a broadcast from a station that knows the dam is holding. My leg. Evan looked at his cast. There's a golf cart, Eris said. Behind the maintenance shed. I saw it when we came in. If it is charged, we can cross the fairway and get into the Cougar Mountain Wildland Park. From there, it's trails all the way to Issaquah. And if it doesn't have a charge, then I carry you, Eris said. The door handle turned. Eris spun around, grabbing a rag and pretending to clean the table. Karen walked in. She wasn't holding wine this time. She was holding a revolver. Eris, she said. Her voice was tight. Come outside. What is it? Just come. Chapter 14. The Cold Equation. Vista House, Crown Point, Oregon. The fire was dying. Sarah stared at the embers of the geology of the Columbia Gorge. The paper ash was gray and delicate, crumbling under the weight of the silence in the rotunda. The temperature inside the stone sanctuary had dropped to freezing. We're out of books, Mike whispered, his teeth chattering so hard the words were stuttered. Around them, the 38 survivors were huddled in a tight pile, like penguins in an Antarctic storm. The little girl, Emily, was shivering violently against Sarah's chest. The benches, Sarah said, looking at the heavy marble pews. Can we burn them? Solid stone. Mike shook his head. And the information desk is oak, but we don't have tools to break it apart. Sarah looked up at the stained glass windows. Outside, the wind was howling, a banshee scream that battered the stone walls. Then a light cut through the windows. It wasn't the sun. It was twin beams sweeping across the domed ceiling. Car, someone rasped. Sarah untangled herself from the group. She grabbed the fire extinguisher, her only weapon, and walked to the heavy oak doors. Stay back, she ordered. A vehicle engine rumbled outside. Heavy diesel. Brakes squealed. Someone pounded on the door.
Thud, thud, thud.
Open up. Federal authority. Sarah hesitated. Federal authority? FEMA? The guard? She unlocked the latch and cracked the door. The wind ripped it from her grip, slamming it against the inner wall. Standing in the doorway were 4 soldiers. They wore U.S. Army fatigues, but they were filthy. Their eyes were wild, rimmed with red. They held M4 carbines, but they weren't holding them at the low ready. They were pointing them into the room. Clear the building, the lead soldier barked. He had a sergeant's stripes on his chest, but no name tape. We have injured civilians, Sarah said, standing in the doorway. We have children. We aren't going anywhere. I said clear the building, the sergeant shouted, stepping forward. This location is now a designated command post for the 2nd Battalion Remnant. We need the shelter. You're kicking us out into the storm? Sarah asked, incredulous. You're supposed to help us. The sergeant looked past her at the huddled mass of freezing people. He didn't see people, he saw obstacles. We have orders to secure high ground for comms relay, the sergeant said, his voice flat. Civilians are to proceed to the designated refugee collection point in Troutdale. Troutdale is 5 miles away. Sarah screamed over the wind. Half of them can't walk. They'll die before they reach the bottom of the hill. The sergeant raised his rifle, aiming it at Sarah's chest. That is not my problem, ma'am. You have 5 minutes. Sarah stared at the barrel of the rifle. She looked at the soldier's face. There was no humanity there, only the cold logic of survival. The military had fractured just like everything else. This wasn't a rescue. It was a hostile takeover. Sarah looked back at Mike. Mike was holding a heavy rock. No, Sarah whispered. She turned back to the sergeant.
We'll go, she said.
Sarah, Mike yelled. We'll go, Sarah repeated, her voice shaking with rage. But you remember this. When you're freezing in here alone, you remember the faces of the kids you killed. She walked back to the group. Get up, she said, tears freezing on her cheeks. Everyone get up. We have to move. They stumbled out into the night, pushed by the wind, leaving the warmth of the stone lantern behind. As Sarah stepped onto the icy pavement of the highway, she realized that the earthquake hadn't just broken the ground, it had broken the soul of the country. New Castle, south of Seattle. The escape began with a lie and a screwdriver. Eris sat in the shed, waiting. The digital clock on the wall read 2 a.m. He slipped the latch on the shed door. He had loosened the screws earlier while pretending to look for tools. He crept across the lawn to the guest cottage where Evan was sleeping. The guard patrol had just passed. He could see the taillights of the ATV fading down the perimeter fence. He tapped on the window. Evan was awake, dressed, his cast wrapped in a garbage bag to keep it dry. They moved like ghosts. Eris supported Evan's weight, moving slowly across the wet grass toward the maintenance building. The golf cart was there. It was a utility model with a flatbed. Eris checked the charge meter. 40%. Get in, Eris whispered. Evan slid onto the seat. Eris turned the key. Nothing happened.
Dead.
Evan hissed. No. Eris checked the switch. It's in tow mode. He flipped the switch under the seat. He pressed the pedal. The electric motor whined softly, and the cart lurched forward. They rolled out of the maintenance yard, tires crunching on the gravel. Hey! A flashlight beam hit them from the balcony of the main house.
Karen.
She was awake. Stop.
Bang.
A shot rang out. It hit the gravel 3 feet to their left. Floor it, Evan yelled. Eris slammed the pedal down. The cart surged top speed, 15 miles per hour. It felt agonizingly slow. She's shooting. Eris ducked as another bullet whizzed past, cracking the plastic windshield. They hit the fairway. The grass was slick. The cart fishtailed. Behind them, the lights of the ATV flared to life. The guards were coming. Go right. Into the woods. Evan pointed. We'll crash. Better than being shot. Go. Eris yanked the wheel. The cart bounced over a sand trap, caught air, and slammed down onto the mulch path leading into the Cougar Mountain trails. The ATV roared behind them, faster, louder. They're gaining, Eris shouted. Ahead, the trail narrowed. A wooden footbridge crossed a ravine. It was designed for hikers, maybe 5 feet wide. The bridge. Eris aimed for it. The cart rattled onto the wooden planks. The bridge groaned. Jump. Eris yelled. What? Jump out. Now. Eris slammed the brakes and shoved Evan out the side. They tumbled onto the wooden deck. Eris reached back and slammed the cart into reverse, then jammed a rock onto the accelerator pedal. The empty cart shot backward, straight at the oncoming ATV. The guard on the ATV saw the golf cart hurtling toward him out of the dark. He swerved. The ATV hit the muddy bank, flipped, and rolled into the ravine. A crash, crunch, splash. Silence returned to the woods. Eris lay on the bridge, panting. He looked down at Evan. You okay? Evan nodded, clutching his leg. You wrecked the cart. Yeah, Eris said, looking at the dark trail ahead. Now we walk. Cascadia Head Lighthouse. The smell of rotten eggs was subtle at first, masked by the salt air. Mac watched from the tree line, his spear gun resting on a mossy log. Beside him, Ruiz held a flare, ready to strike. Now, Mac whispered. He pressed the button on the remote. Nothing happened. Damn it, Mac cursed. Signal blocked. He stood up, moving closer to the house, exposing himself. He pointed the remote at the propane tank regulator visible on the side of the house. He pressed it again. Hisses. A loud, angry venting sound echoed through the clearing. The liquid propane turned to gas, expanding rapidly, flooding the intake vent Mac had rigged. Inside the house, chaos erupted almost instantly. Gas. I smell gas. Is the stove on? Get out. It's gonna blow. The front door burst open. The raiders spilled out, coughing, stumbling over each other. There were 4 of them. They weren't holding their rifles. They were rubbing their eyes, panicked by the fear of an explosion. "Light it up," Mac ordered. Ruiz struck the flare and threw it, not at the men, but into the air, landing in the middle of the clearing. The stark white light illuminated the raiders. They froze, blinded again. Mac stepped out from the tree. "Drop them," Mac roared. One of the men reached for a pistol on his belt. Thwump. Mac fired the spear gun. The steel shaft flew true, striking the man in the thigh. He screamed, dropping to the gravel, pinned by the spear. I said drop them. Mac reloaded with a second shaft in one smooth motion. The other 3 men raised their hands. They were terrified. They were outmaneuvered, blinded, and convinced the house behind them was a bomb. "On your knees," Mac commanded. "Face the dirt." They complied. Mac walked forward, kicking the pistol away from the wounded man. He looked at them. They were just men. Scavengers. Vultures. "Ruiz," Mac said, his voice cold. "Get their zip ties. We're taking prisoners." "And the ship?" Ruiz asked, pointing to the dark ocean. "The ship thinks they're safe," Mac said. "We're going to use the radio. We're going to tell the ship to come pick up their cargo." Mac looked at the wounded man. "And when the boat comes into the cove, we're going to introduce them to the rocks." Chapter 15. The Savage Garden. Cougar Mountain, Washington. The woods were not silent. They were screaming. Eris and Evan stumbled through the underbrush of Cougar Mountain Regional Park. The ATV crash had bought them time, but not safety. They were miles from civilization, in pitch darkness, with the temperature dropping. "Do you smell that?" Evan asked, stopping to lean against a cedar tree. He was pale, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Eris sniffed. It wasn't the smell of pine or wet earth. It was sharp, chemical, and cloyingly sweet. "Kerosene," Eris said. "Jet fuel." They crested a small ridge and looked down into the ravine on the other side. The forest had been sheared away. A swath of destruction, 100 yards wide and half a mile long, cut through the trees. At the end of the scar lay the broken fuselage of a Boeing 737. It was Flight 494 out of SeaTac. It must have taken off just as the earthquake hit, losing navigation and ground control. "Oh my God," Evan whispered. The plane was broken into 3 sections. There was no fire. The fuel had likely dumped or burned off on impact hours ago, but the smell remained. "We have to go down there," Eris said. "Eris, that's a grave." Evan recoiled. "We can't. It's a supply cache," Eris said, his voice hard. "We have no coats. No food. No water. There are 200 suitcases in that hold. There are galley carts." He looked at Evan's shivering form. "We are scavenging, Evan. That's the world now." They slid down the muddy embankment toward the wreckage. The silence was absolute. No survivors. The impact had been catastrophic. Eris climbed into the tail section, which was severed and resting upright against a rock. He found a galley cart jammed in the aisle. He ripped the door open. Miniature bottles of vodka. Pretzels. Water bottles. Eris cracked a water bottle and handed it to Evan. Then he grabbed a handful of vodka bottles. "Antiseptic," he muttered. He moved to the overhead bins. He pulled down a carry-on bag. Inside, a heavy wool peacoat. He put it on. It was too big, but it was warm. "Help me find a coat for you," Eris ordered. They spent an hour in the wreckage. It was grim work, stepping over seats, avoiding looking at the faces of the dead. They found a first aid kit in the flight attendant station, bandages, painkillers, burn gel. "Eris." Evan called from the cargo hold, which had split open. "Look at this." Eris climbed down. Evan was shining the keychain light on a black plastic case. It was a Pelican case, shattered open. Inside was a satellite phone. "Does it work?" Eris asked, heart leaping. Evan pressed the power button. The screen flashed green. "Searching for satellite. Battery is at 10%, Evan said. "But it turns on." Eris grabbed it. He didn't dial 911. He dialed his ex-wife's number in Bellevue. Connecting. Ring. Ring. "Hello." A voice. Frantic, terrified. "Eris." Elena! Eris shouted. Elena, is Maya with you? Eris.
Where are you?
The house is gone. The liquefaction. The foundation cracked. Is Maya with you? Eris screamed.
No.
She was at school. At Bellevue High. I can't get to her. The roads are blocked by the National Guard. Eris felt the blood drain from his face. Bellevue High was in the downtown liquefaction zone. I'm coming, Eris said. I'm coming for her. Stay where you are. Eris, the water, the pipes, it's all.
Click.
The battery died. The screen went black. Eris stared at the dead phone. He dropped it into the mud. She's alive, Eris whispered. She was at school. He turned to Evan. He looked like a different man in the stolen wool coat, illuminated by the moonlight reflecting off the aluminum hull. We move, Eris said. We eat the pretzels. We drink the water. And we walk to Bellevue. Historic Columbia River Highway, Oregon. The Oneonta Tunnel was a black mouth in the cliffside. Sarah Jenkins led her freezing flock into the shelter. The tunnel, abandoned for decades and then restored for tourists, was lined with damp timber. It was blocked at the far end by a landslide from years ago, but it was out of the wind. Everyone down, Sarah rasped. Body heat. Pile up. They collapsed on the cold ground. The adrenaline that had carried them down the cliff was gone, replaced by the crushing weight of hypothermia. Sarah sat near the entrance, watching the snow fall on the highway. Mike crawled over to her. He had lost his shoes in the mudslide. His feet were wrapped in torn shirts. We can't make Troutdale, Mike whispered. Not tonight. I know, Sarah said. That soldier, he said there was a collection point. A collection point is just a pen, Mike, Sarah said bitterly. They don't have food. They don't have medicine. They just want to hurt us, so we don't clog up their roads. She looked at the little girl, Emily, sleeping fitfully in Dr. Yen's arms. We need a vehicle, Sarah said. We can't walk anymore. Where do we get a vehicle? The highway is a parking lot of abandoned cars. Exactly, Sarah said. And some of those cars have heaters. And some of those cars have gas. She stood up. Her knees popped. I'm going to scout the road, she said. I need to find a bus. A camper. Something big enough for the criticals. I'll come with you. Mike started to rise.
No.
You can't walk on those feet. Guard the tunnel. Sarah wrapped her Faith Moves Mountain sweatshirt tighter and stepped out into the blizzard. The highway was a graveyard of vehicles. Sedans, SUVs, trucks, all abandoned when the slide blocked the road ahead. She tried door handles.
Locked. Locked. Locked.
She reached a massive RV, a Winnebago. It was sitting crooked, one wheel in the ditch. She tried the door. Unlocked. She stepped inside. It was warm, faintly warm. The engine had been run recently. Get out. A voice croaked from the back. Sarah froze. A man was sitting in the driver's seat, wrapped in a blanket. He had a pistol on his lap. He looked like death, gray skin, sunken eyes. I said, get out. We have children, Sarah said, not moving. We have 40 people freezing to death in the tunnel. We need shelter. I have half a tank of gas, the man said. And I'm not sharing it. Sarah looked at the gun. Then she looked at the man's leg. It was crushed, pinned under the dashboard where the RV had hit the guardrail. He wasn't guarding the RV. He was trapped in it. You can't leave, Sarah said softly. I can shoot you, he countered. And then you'll die here alone. Sarah stepped closer. Or, I can get my team. We can pry that dash off. We can free you. And in exchange, we all fit inside. The man stared at her. His hand shook on the pistol. He looked at the snow piling up on the windshield. You're a doctor? He asked. Paramedic, Sarah said. Close enough. The man lowered the gun. He closed his eyes, tears leaking out. My name is Gary, he whispered. Please, it hurts so bad. Sarah turned and ran back toward the tunnel. She had found their lifeboat. Heseda Head Lighthouse. Mac Mackenzie stood over the captured radio. It was a high-end Marine VHF unit taken from the raiders. He held the microphone. Ruiz stood by the window, watching the dark cove. The 3 surviving raiders were zip-tied in the corner, gagged with duct tape. Channel 16, Mac said. Here goes nothing. He keyed the mic. Salvage 1, Salvage 1. This is Shore Team. Do you copy?
Static.
Then a voice. Suspicious. Shore Team, this is Salvage 1. You're late on the check-in. What's your status? Mac pitched his voice lower, sounding exhausted. We secured the asset, but we have injuries. Gas leak in the house. We need immediate medevac. The Zodiac is compromised. A pause. Copy that. Is the LZ secure? Negative on the beach, LZ. The tide is too high. You need to come into the cove. Bring the ship alongside the rocks at the north point. We can jump aboard from the ledge. The charts show rocks there, Shore Team. Charts are wrong. Mac lied smoothly. The quake shifted the bottom. It's deep water now. We sounded it. You have 20 fathoms all the way to the wall. Silence. The captain on the ship was weighing the risk. A damaged team, a secured lighthouse, a deep water approach. Greed versus caution. Roger that, Shore Team. We are inbound. Have the cargo ready. Mac dropped the mic. They're coming, Mac said. But the water isn't deep, Ruiz said, eyes wide. There's a reef right there. The Devil's Tooth. I know, Mac said. And at high tide, it's 6 feet under the surface. Just enough to rip the keel out of a steel hull. Mac turned to the prisoners. You boys better pray your friends are good swimmers. He grabbed the flare gun. Ruiz, get to the cliff edge. When you hear the crunch, light up the sky. Mac walked out into the wind. He watched the lights of the salvage ship turn toward the cove. They were moving fast, confident in the intel from their team. They were sailing straight into a meat grinder. 10 minutes later, the sound came. It wasn't a crash. It was a screech, the horrific sound of steel being dragged over granite.
Screech.
The ship stopped dead in the water, the stern lifting violently as the bow ground onto the submerged reef.
Now.
Mac yelled. Ruiz fired the flare. The white light illuminated the disaster. The ship was impaled on the reef, listing hard to starboard. Waves were already breaking over the deck. Men were scrambling, falling into the churning water. Mac watched without pity. Welcome to the Oregon coast, he whispered. Chapter 16. The Zero Sum. Historic Columbia River Highway, Oregon. The winching operation was a study in agony. Sarah, Mike, and 3 other men were inside the RV, pulling on the dashboard with a pry bar and a tow strap rigged to the passenger seat frame. 1, 2, pull. The plastic and steel of the dashboard groaned. Gary, the trapped driver, screamed, a sound that cut through the howling wind outside. It's moving, Sarah yelled, bracing her foot against the center console. Gary, pull your leg.
Now.
Gary sobbed, yanking his crushed limb. The dashboard lifted another inch. With a wet, sucking sound, his leg came free. He tumbled backward onto the shag carpet of the living area, blood pouring from his shin. Tourniquet, Sarah barked. She didn't wait for a kit. She whipped off her scarf, wrapped it around his upper calf, and tightened it with a wooden spoon from the galley drawer. You're out, Sarah whispered, wiping sweat from her eyes. You made it. Gary lay panting, staring at the ceiling. Thank you, he croaked. Don't thank me yet, Sarah said, standing up. Open the door. The side door swung open. The blizzard rushed in, followed by the first wave of survivors from the tunnel. Children and elderly first. Sarah commanded, fill the beds, fill the floor, sit on the counters. It was a clown car of misery. The Winnebago was designed for a family of 4. Sarah packed 20 people inside. It was standing room only, body pressed against body. The air instantly turned humid and smelled of wet wool and unwashed bodies. That's it, Mike said, blocking the door. We can't fit anymore. Sarah looked out at the tunnel entrance. 20 more people were still huddled there, wrapped in the remains of the gift shop blankets. We rotate, Sarah shouted to the group outside. 30 minutes inside to warm up, 30 minutes outside. It's the only way. She slammed the door. The RV engine idled. the heater blasting hot air that felt like heaven. Sarah slumped against the bathroom door. She looked at the fuel gauge. Quarter tank. We can't stay here, Gary whispered from the floor. The snow, if it buries the exhaust pipe, we all die of carbon monoxide. Sarah looked at the windshield. The snow was already piling up on the hood. We need to move, Sarah said. Down the hill. To the river level. It's warmer. The road is blocked, Mike reminded her. Not for this, Gary said. He pointed to a switch on the dash. This rig. I reinforced the bumper. It's got a push bar. If the cars in front are just sedans, we can push them.
Sarah looked at Mike.
It was a desperate gamble. Driving a top-heavy RV down an icy, winding historic highway, using it as a battering ram. Load the rest on the roof, Sarah said, her voice hollow. Tie them down. We leave no one behind. Bellevue, Washington. Bellevue is known as a boomburb, a city of glass towers, luxury shopping centers, and manicured parks. Now, it was a canyon of shards. Eris and Evan walked down Bellevue Way. The street was covered in a layer of tempered glass 3 inches thick. It crunched under their boots like frozen snow. The skyscrapers had performed differently than the brick buildings in Seattle. They hadn't collapsed, they had flexed. But in flexing, they had shed their skins. The facades of the Lincoln Square towers had peeled off, raining destruction on the streets below. It's so quiet, Evan whispered. He was wearing the oversized wool coat from the plane crash, looking like a lost child. It's the glass, Eris said. It dampens the sound. They passed a Tesla dealership. The cars were crushed, flattened by falling debris. A looting crew had been there. The battery packs were ripped out of the chassis, scavenged for power storage. There, Eris pointed. Ahead of them, on a hill, sat Bellevue High School. It was a fortress. The brick building was intact. But the football field. The field was a tent city. Blue FEMA tarps, camping tents, and makeshift shelters covered every inch of the artificial turf. Smoke rose from hundreds of campfires. Refugees, Evan said. Or a trap, Eris countered. They approached the perimeter fence. It was guarded, not by police, but by parents. Men and women in expensive ski jackets, holding shotguns and baseball bats. Halt! A woman shouted from behind the chain link. Residents only. We're at capacity. I'm looking for my daughter. Eris shouted, holding up his hands. Maya Thorne. She's a junior. She was at school when it hit. The woman hesitated. We have 2,000 kids here. We can't just let you wander in. I have medical supplies. Eris lied again. He patted the backpack he'd taken from the plane. Antibiotics. Painkillers. Burn gel. The woman's eyes narrowed. In the new economy, antibiotics were worth more than gold. Show me. Eris unzipped the pack, revealing the Pelican first aid kit from the Boeing 737. Let him in. A man next to her said, We need the meds. The nurse is out of everything. The gate rattled open. Eris stepped onto the football field. The smell hit him instantly. Sanitation failure. Trenches had been dug at the end of the field for latrines. Maya. Eris yelled, pushing through the crowd. Maya Thorne. He scanned the faces. Terrified teenagers. Crying children. Teachers trying to maintain order. He ran toward the gymnasium. The doors were open. Inside, it was a trio of center. Maya? He saw a flash of red hair near the bleachers.
Dad.
Eris froze. She was sitting on a sleeping bag, holding a small boy who was crying. She looked older. Her face was dirty, her clothes torn. But she was unhurt. Maya. Eris collapsed to his knees as she ran into him. He buried his face in her shoulder, sobbing. The relief was physically painful, like a cramp releasing. I knew you'd come, she whispered, squeezing him tight. Mom. I couldn't reach Mom. Eris pulled back, looking at her. I talked to her. She's safe. She's at the house. He looked around the gym. It was chaotic, loud, and smelling of fear. We can't stay here, Maya, Eris said. This place, it's a disease vector waiting to happen. And the food is going to run out in 2 days. Where do we go? Maya asked. The bridges are down. Eris looked at Evan, who was leaning against the doorframe, smiling weakly. We go south, Eris said. To the Renton airfield. I saw a plane crash in the woods. It had a radio. If there's any evacuation happening, it'll be from the airfield. Dad, Maya said, pulling on his sleeve. We can't just leave. I'm in charge of the little kids. The kindergartners from the school next door. They have nobody. Eris looked at the group of 6-year-olds huddled on the bleachers. Zero-sum. Eris whispered to himself. To save his daughter, he had to save a dozen others. Okay, Eris said, standing up. Then we take them all. Cascadia Head Lighthouse. The salvage, one was groaning. The steel hull was grinding against the Devil's Tooth Reef, with every swell. The ship was listing 40 degrees to starboard. The deck was awash. Max stood on the gravel beach of the cove, illuminated by the lighthouse lantern that Ruiz had relit using a stash of kerosene found in the shed. Bodies were washing ashore. Some were dead, crushed by the impact or drowned in the cold surf. But some were moving. Help. A man crawled out of the foam, coughing up seawater. He was wearing a tactical vest. Mac walked over to him. He pointed the spear gun at the man's head. Don't, the man wheezed, rolling onto his back. I surrender. Mac looked down. It was the captain. He recognized the voice from the radio. You try to starve us out, Mac said calmly. Business, the captain gasped. Just business. It's not business anymore, Mac said. It's evolution. Ruiz ran down the beach. Mac. The container. The one they were stripping. Mac looked. The blue shipping container the raiders had been working on earlier had washed into the cove, pushed by the tide. It was sitting in the shallows, doors open. What's in it? Mac asked. Look. Ruiz shined a flashlight inside. It wasn't electronics. It wasn't luxury cars. It was MREs. Pallet after pallet of military meals ready to eat. And crates of water filtration units. Disaster relief, Mac realized. This was a FEMA shipment bound for the coast. The tsunami washed it off a barge. Mac looked at the captain. You are stealing relief supplies, Mac said, his voice dropping an octave. Survival of the fittest, the captain spat. Exactly, Mac said. He turned to Ruiz. Strip him. Take his boots, his vest, his radio. Then tie him to the tree with the others. We're keeping them alive. Ruiz asked, surprised. We need labor, Mac said, looking at the massive container of food. We have to move those crates up the cliff before the tide comes in. They want to eat. They work. Mac looked out at the ocean. The shipwreck was a tragedy, yes. But the container was a kingdom. He had food for a year. He had weapons. He had a fortress. Mac Mackenzie wasn't just a survivor anymore. He was the Baron of Cascadia Head. Get to work, Mac ordered the shivering captain. The tide waits for no man. Chapter 17. The Descent. Historic Columbia River Highway, Oregon. The Winnebago screamed. It wasn't just the engine, AV-10 Triton pushed to its red line. It was the chassis itself. The frame groaned under the weight of 60 people, 40 packed inside like sardines, and 20 tied to the roof rack with climbing rope and electrical cords, wrapped in tarps against the blizzard. Brace. Mike yelled from the driver's seat. Through the frosted windshield, the taillights of a stalled Subaru Outback loomed out of the whiteout. Crunch. The RV slammed into the back of the sedan. Gary's reinforced push bar did its job, biting into the Subaru's bumper. Push it. Sarah screamed from the passenger seat, her hand hovering over the dashboard grab handle. Mike floored the gas. The RV's dual rear tires spun on the ice, smelling of burning rubber, before catching traction on the gravel beneath. The massive vehicle surged forward, shoving the Subaru sideways. The sedan scraped against the stone guardrail, sparks flying, before finally skidding into the ditch, clearing a path. Clear, Mike shouted, wrestling the wheel. The RV lurched past, tilting dangerously. On the roof, people screamed. Sarah heard the thud of boots on the metal ceiling. If the RV tipped, the people on top would be crushed or flung into the gorge. How far to the bottom? Gary asked from the floor, his face gray with pain. 2 miles, Sarah said, checking the GPS on her phone, which was working only as an offline map. We have to get past Shepherd's Dell. They rounded a hairpin turn. The headlights cut through the snow, revealing a nightmare scenario. A semi-truck had jackknifed across the road. It wasn't fully blocking the path, but the trailer was hanging halfway over the cliff edge. There was a gap, maybe 8 feet wide, between the truck cab and the rock wall. The RV was 8 feet, 4 inches wide. We can't make it. Mike slammed the brakes. The RV slid, fishtailing, coming to a halt 10 feet from the truck. We have to, Sarah said. We can't back up. Not on this ice. She looked at the rock wall. It was jagged basalt. We're going to lose the side mirrors, Sarah said. And probably the awning. And the windows. She turned to the terrified mass of people in the cabin. Everyone on the left side. Lean left. We need to tilt away from the rock. The crowd shuffled, pressing against the driver's side wall. Mike, Sarah said, putting a hand on his shoulder. Thread the needle. Mike exhaled, a cloud of steam in the cold cab. He eased the foot off the brake. The RV crept forward.
Screech.
The sound was deafening. The passenger side of the RV ground against the rock wall. The fiberglass skin shredded. The side windows exploded inward, showering the passengers with safety glass and snow. Keep going. Sarah shielded her face. On the roof, the tarp ripped. A man yelled as the rock wall scraped inches from his leg. Almost there, Mike gritted his teeth, punching the gas. With a final, tearing metallic shriek, the RV popped out the other side of the gap. We're through, but the victory was short-lived. The momentum of the squeeze shot them forward onto a sheet of black ice. I have no steering, Mike yelled, spinning the wheel. The RV slid sideways, drifting toward the cliff edge. The stone guardrail was ancient, crumbling. It wouldn't hold 10 tons of vehicle. Turn into the slide. Gary roared from the floor. Mike corrected. The back end swung around. The rear bumper clipped the guardrail, BAM, taking out a chunk of stone that tumbled into the abyss. The RV shuddered, teetering for a terrifying second, before slamming back down onto all 6 wheels. They rolled to a stop in a snowbank. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the sobbing of a child. Sarah looked out the shattered window. They were at river level. The wind was less violent here. They had made it off the mountain. Is everyone alive? Sarah called out, her voice trembling. A thumbs up from the back. A banging on the roof signaled the survivors up top were still there. Sarah slumped back in the seat. She looked at her hands. They were bleeding from gripping the door handle. Keep driving, she whispered. Get us to the water. Bellevue, Washington. The procession looked like a grim parody of a school field trip. Eris Thorne walked point, holding a length of yellow nylon rope. Tied to the rope at 3-foot intervals were 12 children, aged 5 and 6. At the rear, Maya walked, holding the end of the rope and carrying a baseball bat. Evan, hobbling in the oversized coat, walked alongside, acting as a flanker. They moved through the liquefaction zone of downtown Bellevue. The street lights were dead. The only light came from the fires burning in the high-rise apartments above them. Mr. Eris? A small boy named Leo tugged on the rope. My feet hurt. I know Leo, Eris said, keeping his voice steady. We're playing the quiet game, remember? Super spies don't complain about feet. Eris scanned the windows of the ruined storefronts. Looters had already picked the Nordstrom and the Apple store clean. Now the threats were more primal. A pack of dogs trotted across the intersection of Northeast 8th Street. They stopped, watching the line of small, slow-moving prey. Eris raised the rock hammer. He made eye contact with the alpha. He didn't show fear. He showed aggression. Keep moving, Eris whispered to the line. Don't run. The dogs watched them pass, then turned away to investigate a tipped-over hot dog cart. They reached the edge of the city, near the Mercer Slough Nature Park. The plan was to cut through the wetlands to reach the old rail line that ran south to Renton. But the bridge over the slough was gone. The wooden boardwalk had collapsed into the peat bog. The water below was black and oily. "We can't cross," Maya said, joining Eris at the front. "We have to waiting," Eris said. "The water is waist deep for me. Chest deep for them." "Hypothermia, Dad," Maya warned. "It's 30 degrees out." Eris looked at the kids. They were wearing mismatched coats, sneakers, pajama bottoms. They wouldn't last 10 minutes in that water. "We need a raft," Eris said. He looked around. The Nature Center building had collapsed, but the debris field was full of potential. "Evan," Eris called. "The insulation panels. The rigid foam from the roof." They spent 20 minutes lashing 3 large sheets of pink insulation foam together using the yellow rope. It was a crude barge, but buoyant. "Okay," Eris said. "Leo, Sarah, Timmy on the boat. Sit crisscross applesauce. Do not move." They loaded 6 kids onto the foam. Eris and Evan waded into the freezing muck, pushing the raft. The water was shockingly cold, biting through Eris's jeans instantly. "Sing a song." Maya ordered the kids from the bank. "Keep the rhythm." The kids started singing the wheels on the bus, their voices tiny and fragile in the vast darkness. Eris pushed. His legs went numb. He focused on the song. The wheels on the bus go round and round. He got the first group across to the muddy bank on the south side. He turned back for the second group. "Dad, look." Maya pointed upstream. Something was floating down the slough. It wasn't debris. It was a house. A houseboat, torn from its moorings on Lake Washington, drifting aimlessly through the flooded wetland. And there was a light in the window. "Hey," Eris shouted, waving his arms. "Help us." The houseboat drifted closer. A man stepped out onto the deck. He held a lantern. "Keep it down," the man hissed. "You want to bring the gangs?" He looked at Eris, waist deep in the bog. He looked at the raft of children. The man lowered the lantern. He spat into the water. "Throw me a line," the man said. "I've got room for the small ones. But the adults sleep on the deck." Eris grabbed the bowline of the houseboat as it drifted past. It was salvation. "Get on," Eris told Maya. "Get them all on." Heseda Head Lighthouse. The library of the keeper's house had become a war room. Max sat at the heavy oak desk. On the wall, he had pinned a nautical chart of the coast. Red XS marked the known dangers: the reef, the landslide, the blockade. In the corner, the captain, whose name was unrecognizable, simply Prisoner 1, was on his knees, scrubbing the floorboards. Ruiz entered, carrying a crate of MREs. He looked disturbed. "Mac," Ruiz said, "we have a problem."
"What?"
Mac didn't look up from the chart. "The prisoners. They're asking for blankets. The shed is freezing." "They have the tarps from the boat," Mac said. "It's 30 degrees, Mac. One of them, the one he shot in the leg, the wound is infected. He's feverish." Mac finally looked up. His eyes were shadowed, hard. "We gave him antibiotics. We gave him 2 pills. He needs a course. He needs heat." Mac stood up. He walked over to the prisoner scrubbing the floor. "Hey," Mac said. The captain stopped scrubbing. He looked up. His eyes burned with hate, but he said nothing. "Your man is sick," Mac said. "Ruiz thinks we should bring him into the house." "He's dying," the captain said. "Sepsis." "If I bring him in," Mac said, "he consumes resources. He consumes heat. He consumes space. What do I get in return?" "You get to keep your soul," the captain sneered. Mac laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. "My soul went down with the Lady Jane," Mac said. "I'm trading in survival credits now." He turned to Ruiz. "Leave him in the shed. If he dies, we bury him. If he lives, he works." "Mac." Ruiz dropped the crate. "This is wrong. We aren't monsters. We are alive." Mac slammed his hand on the desk. "Look out that window, Ruiz. The world is dead. There is no Coast Guard. There is no law. There is only us and the food and the people trying to take it." Mac walked to the gun cabinet. He pulled out the AR-15 they had taken from the raiders. "You want to be soft, Ruiz? Go ahead. Take him the blanket. But if he tries to jump you, if he tries to take this house, you pull the trigger."
"Can you do that?"
Ruiz looked at the gun. He looked at Mac. "I don't know who you are anymore," Ruiz whispered. "I'm the guy keeping you breathing," Mac said. He threw a set of keys to Ruiz. "You have first watch."
Don't fall asleep.
Mac watched Ruiz leave. He looked back at the captain. "You think I'm cruel," Mac said to the prisoner. "I think you're scared," the captain replied quietly. "And scared men make the best tyrants." Mac stared at him for a long moment. Then he kicked the bucket of soapy water over, flooding the floor the man had just cleaned. "Missed a spot," Mac said. "Do it again." Chapter 18, The Toll. Cascade Locks, Oregon. The Winnebago died just east of the Bridge of the Gods. It didn't explode or crash. It simply starved. The engine sputtered, the massive V10 coughed once, and the power steering locked up. The RV rolled silently to a stop in the middle of I-84, the silence of the gorge rushing back in to fill the void. "We're out," Mike said, resting his forehead on the steering wheel. Sarah looked out the broken side window. The snow had stopped, replaced by a freezing drizzle. Ahead of them, the steel truss of the Bridge of the Gods lay in the Columbia River. The bridge had twisted and fallen, its metal skeleton creating a dam of debris against the current. But on the shore, in the town of Cascade Locks, there were lights. Real lights. Not fires, but electric street lamps running on a localized grid. "Town," Gary whispered from the floor. "They have power." Sarah opened the door. "Everyone out. We walk the last mile." The 60 survivors spilled out of the RV. They were a pathetic sight, wrapped in carpets, trash bags, and torn upholstery. The people who had ridden on the roof were blue-lipped, barely able to stand. They limped toward the town. As they approached the underpass leading to the main street, a spotlight blinded them. Halt. A barricade had been erected using concrete ecology blocks and overturned semi-trucks. Men in high-visibility vests stood atop the wall, holding hunting rifles. "State your business," a voice boomed. "We are refugees from Portland," Sarah shouted, stepping to the front. "We have 60 people. Injured, children, elderly. We need shelter." The spotlight swept over the group, highlighting the blood-soaked bandages, the crutches, the shivering children. "We are at capacity," the guard shouted back. "The Marine Park camp is full. Keep moving east to Hood River." "We can't," Sarah screamed, her voice cracking. "They can't walk another 10 miles. We have critical patients." A silence stretched. The men on the wall conferred. "Send the leader forward," the guard commanded. "Alone." Sarah walked to the barricade. A side gate opened, and she stepped through. She found herself facing a committee of 3. A woman in a sheriff's jacket, a man in a hard hat, and an older man in a suit. "I'm Dr. Sarah Jenkins." She lied about her title slightly, knowing it carried more weight. "I have medical training. I have a trauma team." The woman in the sheriff's jacket looked her up and down. "We have plenty of mouths, doctor. We don't have plenty of medicine. Do you have supplies?" "We have skills," Sarah said. The older man in the suit stepped forward. He looked like a town mayor. "Here is the deal," he said, his voice practical and devoid of empathy. "We have a generator running off the dam locks. We have heat, but we have finite food." He pointed to the group huddled in the dark underpass. "We will take the medical personnel. We will take the children under 12. And we will take able-bodied men willing to work the debris crews." Sarah felt a cold knot in her stomach. And the rest? The elderly? The crippled? The ones who can't work? The mayor shook his head. "We can't feed them. They keep walking." "You're asking me to split families," Sarah hissed. "You're asking me to sentence the weak to death." "I'm asking you to pay the toll," the sheriff said. "This is a lifeboat, not a cruise ship. Make a choice." Sarah looked back at her group. She saw Dr. Yen holding Emily. She saw Gary, who couldn't walk. She saw the elderly woman who had survived the long walk from the Burnside Bridge. "I can't do that," Sarah whispered. "Then you all stay out," the mayor said, turning away. Gates closed. Sarah stood there, shivering. The warmth of the town lights was just yards away. The smell of wood smoke and cooking food drifted over the wall. She had to choose. Save the few, or doom them all. Lake Washington, south of Bellevue. The houseboat puttered south, the engine a low thrum beneath the deck. Eris sat on a plastic cooler, watching the shoreline. The fires of the mansions on Mercer Island cast long, dancing reflections on the black water. The owner of the boat, who called himself Miller, came out of the cabin. He handed Eris a mug of instant coffee. "Kids are asleep," Miller said. He was a thick-set man with a beard and eyes that moved too fast. "Thank you for this," Eris said, taking the cup. "For picking us up. Couldn't leave little ones in the mud," Miller shrugged. He looked at the raft of insulation foam they had towed behind the boat. "You got guts, getting them out of Bellevue." "We're heading to the Renton airfield," Eris said. "Is that where you're going?" Miller hesitated. He looked south, toward the glow of the industrial zone. "Renton is complicated," Miller said. "The airfield is run by the Guard. But the river mouth? That's controlled by the gangs. The Boeing boys. They looted the plant security armory." "So why go there?" "I have a drop to make," Miller said vaguely. "Business." Eris sipped the coffee. It was bitter. "What kind of business?" "The kind that keeps the lights on." Miller turned to go back inside. "Stay on deck. Don't go poking around the hold." Eris waited until Miller closed the sliding glass door. He waited another 10 minutes. Then, he crept along the gunnel toward the bow. There was a forward hatch, covered by a blue tarp. Eris lifted the corner of the tarp. Underneath were crates. Not food. Not water. Green metal crates. Stamped 5.5 6mm NATO. And alongside them, boxes of civilian AR-15s, still in the packaging. Eris let the tarp drop. Miller wasn't a savior. He was a gun runner. Looking for something? Eris spun around. Miller was standing there, holding a Glock. He wasn't smiling anymore. "I told you not to poke," Miller said. "You're running guns," Eris whispered, "into a disaster zone." "Supply and demand, Professor," Miller said, stepping closer. "The gangs in Renton need hardware to hold their territory. They pay in fuel, food, and safe passage. And us." Eris gestured to the cabin where the kids slept. "Where do we fit in?" "The river patrols shoot smugglers on sight," Miller said cold. "But a refugee boat? A boat full of cute kindergartners singing songs? They waved that right through." Eris felt sick. "We're human shields." "Your camouflage," Miller corrected. "Now get back to the stern."
"Sit down."
"And if you say a word to that daughter of yours, well, accidents happen on the water." Eris walked back to the stern, his legs feeling like lead. He sat down next to Maya, who was dozing against the railing. He looked at the dark water. They were trapped on a floating powder keg, sailing straight into a war zone. Cascadia Head Lighthouse. The lantern room was cold. The glass was cracked from the sniper fire, whistling in the wind. Ruiz sat on the floor, his back against the lens pedestal. His hands were zip-tied behind his back. The door to the gallery deck opened. Mac walked in. He was eating a peach from a can, juice running down his chin. "Comfortable?" Mac asked. Ruiz looked up. His face was bruised. "You locked me up," Ruiz said. "Like an animal." "You tried to steal from the stockpile," Mac said, wiping his chin. "You tried to give morphine to a dead man walking." "He was in pain, Mac." "Pain is data," Mac said. "It tells you you're still alive. Wasting morphine on a septic leg is bad math." Mac walked to the window. Down in the cove, the salvage one was a dark, broken shape on the reef. The waves were breaking over it, tearing it apart. "The prisoner died an hour ago," Mac said casually. "The fever took him." Ruiz closed his eyes. "You killed him." "Bacteria killed him," Mac corrected. "I just didn't interfere." He turned to Ruiz. "The other two are working. They're hauling the water crates up the cliff. They understand the new arrangement. Work, eat, live. Don't work, starve, die." "And me?" Ruiz asked. "Do I work?" Mac looked at his deckhand. They had fished together for 3 years. They had weathered storms, drunk beers, shared profits. "You're a liability, Ruiz," Mac said softly. "You have a conscience." In the old world, that was a virtue. Here, it's a tumor. Mac knelt down. I can't trust you to watch my back. You'll hesitate. You'll try to save someone. And that will get me killed. So what? You gonna shoot me too? Mac pulled a knife. Ruiz flinched. Mac reached behind Ruiz and cut the zip ties. Get up, Mac said. Ruiz rubbed his wrists, standing slowly. There's a trail, Mac said, pointing east toward the dense forest. It leads to Florence. It's overgrown, dangerous, and probably washed out. You're kicking me out? I'm giving you a choice, Mac said. You can stay here, but you stay in the shed with the prisoners. You work the chain gang. You eat what I give you. You give up your say. Mac pointed to the door. Or you walk. You take your chances in the woods. Maybe you find good people. Maybe you find wolves. Ruiz looked at Mac. He looked at the warm light of the lantern, then at the black void of the forest. You're going to die here alone, Mac, Ruiz said. You'll be the king of nothing. Better a king than a corpse, Mac replied. Ruiz grabbed his jacket. He didn't look back. He walked out of the lantern room, down the spiral stairs, and out the front door. Mac watched from the gallery deck as the small flashlight beam bobbed away into the trees, disappearing into the night. Mac stood alone on the lighthouse. He was the master of the rock. He had food, weapons, and slaves. He took a bite of the peach. It tasted sweet. He felt absolutely nothing. Chapter 19. The Crossing. Renton, Washington, South Lake, Washington. The houseboat drifted into the mouth of the Cedar River like a ghost ship. Eris sat on the bow, his arm around Maya. The raft of insulation foam had been cut loose miles back. The kindergartners were now huddled inside the cabin, sleeping in a pile of coats and life jackets. Dad, Maya whispered, eyeing the dark industrial banks of the river. There are people in the trees. Eris looked. She was right. Shadows moved among the cottonwoods. The flicker of cigarette lighters. The glint of metal. Stay down, Eris said. Let Miller do the talking. Miller killed the engine. The boat drifted toward a concrete pier that had once been part of the Boeing 737 plant. A spotlight blinded them from the shore. Identify, a voice boomed. Delivery from the north. Miller shouted, standing on the roof of the cabin with his hands up. I got the hardware. And I got civilians for transit. The spotlight dimmed. 3 men walked out onto the pier. They were heavily armed, AK-47s, not hunting rifles. They wore mismatched military gear mixed with biker leathers. The Boeing boys. Miller threw a line. One of the men caught it and tied off the boat. Let's see the crates, the leader said. He had a scar running through his eyebrow and looked no older than 25. Miller led them to the forward hold. He pulled back the tarp. The guns gleamed in the moonlight. Nice, the leader nodded. And the payment? Fuel. 10 drums of diesel, Miller said. And safe passage for me to get back out. Sure, the leader smiled. It was a shark smile, but the boat stays. Miller froze. That wasn't the deal. Deal changed. We need river transport. The bridges are down. The leader signaled. 2 more men stepped out of the shadows, leveling their weapons at Miller. Eris. Maya squeezed his hand so hard her nails dug in. Eris saw the geometry of violence forming. Miller wasn't going to give up his boat. The gang wasn't going to pay. Hey! Eris shouted, standing up. We have children on board. School kids. The leader looked at Eris, then at the cabin windows where curious faces were pressing against the glass. Kids. The leader laughed. Refugees? Perfect. We need leverage against the guard at the airfield. Human shields work better when they're cute. Eris felt a cold clarity wash over him. Zero-sum. He looked at the fuel drums stacked on the pier, the payment Miller was expecting. Maya, Eris whispered. Get the flare gun from the emergency kit. Under the bench seat. Dad, do it. Now. Maya scrambled back into the cabin. Miller was arguing, his hand inching toward the Glock in his waistband. You can't take my ship. Bang. The leader shot Miller in the chest. No hesitation. Miller crumpled onto the deck, dead before he hit the fiberglass. Get everyone off, the leader ordered his men. Grab the guns and the kids. Eris grabbed a bottle of vodka from the scavenger pile. He stuffed a rag into the neck. He pulled his lighter. Back off, Eris screamed. The gang members laughed. You gonna fight us with a bottle, old man? Maya, Eris yelled. The flare. Maya burst out of the cabin, holding the orange plastic pistol. Shoot the fuel drums. Eris pointed to the pier. What? Shoot them. Maya fired. The flare streaked through the air, hitting the stack of diesel drums on the concrete pier. It didn't explode immediately, but it sizzled against the metal, heat building. The gang members flinched, looking at the fuel. Eris didn't wait. He threw the Molotov cocktail not at the men, but at the rope tying the boat to the pier. The rope, soaked in river oil, caught fire. The plastic fibers melted and snapped. The current caught the houseboat, swinging the bow away from the dock. They're drifting, the leader screamed. Open fire. Bullets hammered the hull. Thwack, thwack, thwack. Glass shattered. Get down. Eris tackled Maya, covering her body with his. The houseboat drifted rapidly into the darkness of the river channel, spinning in the current. Behind them, on the pier, the heat from the flare finally compromised a leaking drum. Humph. A fireball erupted on the dock, scattering the gang members. Eris lay on the deck, heart pounding. He crawled to the cabin. Is everyone okay? The kindergartners were screaming, crying, covered in glass shards, but they were low enough to be missed by the gunfire. Eris looked at Miller's body. He grabbed the dead man's Glock. He looked at the controls. The engine was dead, shot out. They were drifting rudderless down the Cedar River, deeper into the dark heart of Renton. We have to beach it, Eris said, grabbing the wheel, though it was useless. Before we hit the rapids. Cascade Locks, Oregon. The line was drawn in the snow. On one side, the warmth of the town. On the other, the dark underpass. Last chance. The mayor called out from the barricade. Medical personnel and children.
Now.
Sarah Jenkins looked at her group. Dr. Yen stepped forward. She was holding Emily. Take her, Yen said, handing the child to Sarah. What? Sarah stared at her. I'm going in, Yen said. I'm a surgeon. I'm useful. I can make sure the kids get fed. Yen turned to the group. If you can work, go. If you have a skill, go. Don't die out here for pride. It was a mutiny of survival. One by one, people stepped across the line. The young men, the nurses, the healthy teenagers. Gary, the man with the crushed leg, sat on the ground, leaning against the concrete wall. He waved his hand. Go on, he told his wife, who was weeping. Go. I'll catch up. She didn't want to leave him, but the cold was a physical weight. She kissed his forehead and crossed the line. Sarah stood alone with the rejects. The elderly, the crippled,
The sick.
There were 12 of them left.
And Gary.
You coming, doctor? The mayor asked Sarah. We need you. Sarah looked at the town. It was safety. It was food. She looked at Gary. She looked at the old woman. No, Sarah said. She handed Emily to Dr. Yen. Take care of her, Sarah whispered. Don't let them separate the kids. Yen nodded, tears streaming down her face. You're going to die out here, Sarah. Maybe, Sarah said. The gate closed. The barricade was sealed. Sarah turned to her small, broken band. We can't stay here, she said. The wind in the underpass will freeze us by morning. Where?
Gary asked.
Sarah pointed to the river, to the dark, twisted shape of the bridge of the gods. The steel truss bridge had collapsed, but it hadn't fallen straight down. It was canted, twisting like a ribbon. Sections of the deck were submerged, but the upper truss formed a jagged steel spine connecting Oregon to Washington. We cross, Sarah said. That's suicide, Mike said. He had stayed behind. Of course he had. The Washington side has the highway, Sarah said. Highway 14. It's lower elevation, less snow, and there are tunnels. If we can get across, we can find shelter. And if we fall? Then we don't freeze, Sarah said grimly. She walked over to Gary. Mike, grab his left side. I got the right. They hoisted the injured man up. Let's go for a walk, Sarah said. They moved toward the riverbank. The bridge loomed above them, a skeletal monster in the mist. The wind howled through the steel girders, singing a song of destruction. Sarah stepped onto the first bent section of the grating. Below her, 50 feet down, the Columbia River churned, black and hungry. She didn't look down. She looked at the north bank. Cascadia Head Lighthouse. Mac stood on the gallery deck, looking east. The sun was rising over the coast range, casting long shadows through the trees. The forest was silent. Ruiz was gone. Mac. The voice came from the doorway. It was the captain. He was holding a tray of coffee. Mac turned, hand dropping to the pistol on his belt. The captain wasn't tied up anymore. Mac had relaxed the restrictions, needing the labor to move the massive stockpile of food. Coffee, the captain said, setting the tray on the railing. From the stash. Step back, Mac ordered. The captain stepped back, leaning casually against the doorframe. You saw it too, didn't you? The captain asked. Saw what?
The aircraft.
Last night. High altitude. Moving south to north. Mac took the coffee. He kept his eyes on the man. Surveillance drone, Mac said. Global Hawk. Probably mapping the damage. Exactly. The captain smiled thinly.
Mapping.
Not helping. They know we're here. They can see the lighthouse. They can see the wreck of my ship. But they aren't dropping supplies. They aren't landing choppers. The captain gestured to the vast, empty ocean. They've ridden off the coast, Mac. The liquefaction destroyed the ports. The landslides took the roads. We are a dead zone. A quarantine sector. Get to the point, Mac said. The point, the captain said, his eyes glittering, is that you're playing king of the castle, thinking the sheriff is going to come back someday and arrest you. He isn't. The captain stepped closer. This is the new world. Permanently. And in this world, a man alone, even a man with a gun, is just a target. Mac looked at the 3 other prisoners working in the yard below, organizing the crates. They moved with a rhythm now. A military rhythm. You're suggesting an alliance, Mac said. I'm suggesting a promotion, the captain said. You have the location. I have the men. We have enough food to build an army. Why stop at the lighthouse? We could take Florence. We could take the whole Central Coast. Mac looked at the captain's face. He saw ambition. He saw cruelty. He saw a mirror. Mac sipped the coffee. And if I say no, then you have to kill us all, the captain said simply. Because we won't stay slaves forever. And you have to sleep sometime. Mac looked out at the ocean. The waves crashed against the reef, grinding the bones of the salvage one. He was tired. So tired. The constant vigilance was eroding his mind like the sea eroding the cliffs. An army, Mac whispered. We call it a militia, the captain corrected. Sounds better. Mac lowered the gun. What's your name? Mac asked. Vance, the captain said. Mac extended his hand. Welcome to the Cascadia Free State, Vance. Vance shook it. His grip was iron. As they shook, Mac saw a flicker of triumph in Vance's eyes. Mac knew, with absolute certainty, that Vance would try to kill him eventually. But not today, Mac thought. Today we survive. Chapter 20. The Steel Spine. The Bridge of the Gods, Columbia River. The bridge was not a bridge anymore. It was a dragon's spine made of twisted steel, rising out of the black water. Sarah Jenkins tied the end of the climbing rope around her waist. She tied the other end to Mike, who was tied to Gary, who was strapped to a makeshift litter made of 2 stop signs and duct tape. Don't look down, Sarah shouted over the wind. Look at your hands. Look at the steel. They were 50 feet out from the Oregon shore. The deck of the bridge had fallen away here, leaving only the upper truss, a lattice of girders 2 feet wide, covered in ice. They crawled, hand over hand. The metal burned their skin through their gloves. Below them, the river roared, foaming around the debris dam. I can't, the elderly woman, Mrs. Higgins, froze. She was clinging to a rivet plate, staring into the abyss. It's shaking. It's not the bridge, it's the wind. Sarah yelled, crawling back to her. Mrs. Higgins, look at me. Grab my ankle. Sarah dragged her forward. Inch by inch, they reached the middle of the river. Here, the bridge had twisted violently. The truss dipped down, forcing them to slide down a 40-degree angle of icy steel to reach the next section. We have to slide, Mike yelled. If we lose momentum, we fall. Gary first, Sarah ordered. They pushed the litter. Gary screamed as he slid down the steel beam, sparks flying from the metal stop signs. Mike grabbed the rope, straining to break him before he hit the junction plate. Snap. The rope frayed on a sharp edge. Gary's litter slewed sideways, dangling over the edge of the girder. Hold him. Sarah lunged, grabbing Mike's belt as he was pulled toward the edge. For a second, they formed a human chain of tension. Sarah anchored to a crossbeam, holding Mike, who was holding the rope, which held Gary, who was swinging 500 feet above the water.
Pull.
Sarah roared, her muscles tearing. They heaved. Gary scrambled, clawing at the ice, and managed to hook his good leg over the beam. He dragged himself back onto the relative safety of the truss. They lay there for a minute, gasping, the adrenaline making them nauseous. Halfway, Mike wheezed. They kept moving. The Washington side loomed closer. The bridge structure here was more intact, leading to a concrete abutment that had survived the collapse. When Sarah's boots finally touched the solid ground of the Washington bank, she didn't cheer. She fell to her knees and vomited bile into the snow. They were across. They looked up. Highway 14 was dark and silent. But 100 yards to the west, the mouth of a tunnel gaped. Shelter, Sarah whispered. She stood up, helping Mrs. Higgins to her feet. We made it, Mike said, looking back at the nightmare metal skeleton they had just traversed. We actually made it. We're not safe yet, Sarah said, pointing to the dark woods lining the road. We're just on the other side. Now we survive. Renton Municipal Airport, the zone. The houseboat ran aground with a sickening thud. It plowed into the mudflats at the south end of the runway, tilting sharply. Inside the cabin, the children woke up screaming. Everyone stay down, Eris shouted. He peered out the shattered window. They were sitting in the mud, 50 yards from the perimeter fence of the airfield. Floodlights snapped on. Blinding white beams hit the boat. Exit the vessel. Hands in the air. A loudspeaker. Military grade. Eris saw them, Humvees mounting .50 caliber machine guns rolling down the tarmac. Soldiers in full combat rattle taking positions at the fence line. Maya, Eris said, turning to his daughter. Check the kids. Make sure no one is bleeding. He grabbed Miller's Glock from his belt. He looked at it for a second. Then, he ejected the magazine and racked the slide, clearing the chamber. He threw the gun into the river.
Dad.
We don't walk in armed, Eris said. We walk in as victims. He opened the sliding door and stepped out onto the tilted deck, hands high. We are civilians. Eris screamed into the lights. We have children. Refugees from Bellevue. Hold position, the voice boomed back. Eris waited. A squad of soldiers cut through the fence wire and advanced on the boat, weapons raised. Get them out, the sergeant ordered. Single file. Maya led the kindergartners out. They were crying, holding hands, a chain of dirty, terrified little souls. The soldiers lowered their rifles. You can't aim a machine gun at a 5-year-old holding a teddy bear. Jesus, the sergeant muttered. How many? 12 kids, Eris said, stepping down into the mud. 2 adults. We need water. We need shelter. The sergeant looked at Eris. He saw the pilot's coat, the bandage on the arm, the look in the eyes. This is a restricted zone, sir. Evacuation only. Then evacuate us, Eris said. Where to? The whole state is a disaster area. We're flying sorties to Moses Lake, but the birds are full. I don't care, Eris said. Just get them inside the wire. The sergeant sighed. He keyed his radio. Command, this is Bravo team. We have unfriendlies, scratch that. We have a school bus on a boat. Requesting transport to the terminal. The gate opened. Eris walked onto the tarmac. The airfield was a scene of controlled chaos. Blackhawks and Chinooks were landing and taking off in a constant rhythm. Tents were set up everywhere. He looked at Maya. She was carrying the smallest boy. She looked exhausted, but she was alive. "We made it, Dad," she whispered. Eris looked at the soldiers, at the heavy weaponry, at the fences. "We made it inside the cage," Eris corrected. "Now we have to figure out who holds the key." Cascadia Head Lighthouse. The map was spread out on the dining table of the keeper's house. It was an old tourist map of the Oregon coast. Mac stood at the head of the table. Vance stood to his right. "Florence is here." Vance pointed to the town 10 miles south. Population 8,000. Mostly retirees. They have a Fred Meyer, a hospital, and the Coast Guard station. "The station will be empty," Mac said. "The cutters would have deployed immediately." "Exactly," Vance said. "But the armory won't be empty. And the fuel depot." Mac looked at the map. He traced the coastline. "We have the food," Mac said. "We have the high ground. But we only have 5 men." "We recruit," Vance said. "We go into Florence. We find the young, the angry, the hungry. We offer them a deal. You pledge to the lighthouse, you eat. You fight for us, you eat well." "Feudalism," Mac noted. "Civilization," Vance corrected. "Someone has to organize the chaos. Why not us?" Mac walked to the window. The prisoners, now laborers, were building a secondary wall around the clearing, using stone from the garden. He thought about Ruiz, out there in the dark woods. He thought about the man he used to be, the fisherman who worried about quotas and engine maintenance. That man was dead, drowned in the tsunami. Mac turned back to the table. He picked up a red marker. He circled Cascadia Head. Then he circled Florence. "We take the town," Mac said. "But we do it quietly. We send scouts. We find out who's in charge, and we remove them." Vance smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who had found a new alpha. "When do we move?" "Tomorrow night," Mac said. "We take the ATVs from the shed. We ride down the beach." Mac looked at the red circle on the map. It looked like a target, or a bloodstain. "Prepare the men, Vance," Mac ordered. "The Cascadia Free State is expanding." Epilogue. The New World. 3 days later. The ash began to fall on the 3rd day. Not from the fires, but from the mountain. Mount Rainier, destabilized by the massive tectonic shift, vented a plume of steam and gray ash that covered the Pacific Northwest in a fine, gritty shroud. In the Cascade Mountains, Sarah Jenkins stood at the entrance of the tunnel on Highway 14. She watched the gray snow fall, covering the footprints of her survivors. They had found an abandoned maintenance shed. They had a roof. They had each other. But they were alone. In eastern Washington, inside a refugee tent at Moses Lake, Eris Thorne sat on a cot, watching Maya sleep. He held a stolen radio. The broadcasts were sporadic, confusing. The government was trying to re-establish control, but the West Coast was effectively gone. He was no longer a professor. He was a refugee. And he was planning his next move. On the Oregon coast, Mac Mackenzie stood on the balcony of the Florence City Hall. The town square was filled with people, frightened, hungry people. Behind him, armed men stood guard. Mac raised a megaphone. He didn't offer democracy. He offered bread and order. And the people cheered. The earth had broken. The grid had failed. The maps were wrong. The Cascadia Break was over. The Cascadia War had begun.